So anyways, this is about support groups in fairly challenging times, which we've been through for the last year. So our goal here was to create a conference that empowered support groups to, I guess, bounce back once everybody gets a needle in their arm and we can get together. And we wanted to ensure that no prostate support group in Canada feels they're unable to continue with because there's a lack of support. That is over with. You can assume the cavalry has arrived. There is help now, not on the horizon, but in your lap. And we want to address a variety of the challenges that everybody's facing and see if we can come up with some solutions and some new ideas. So a little teeny bit of housekeeping. If you could keep your mics muted, bottom left for me, and I don't know where it is for you, but keep it muted because it's the white noise will gang up on us. If you have questions during a particular session, please use the chat function and I'll get to them, or Richelle will get to them. And if time permits, after we do our panel, we'll have we've got a whole bunch of questions for the panel to answer, and then we'll have a Q&A from all the questions you folks may have. And if you want to raise your hand, and you'll figure out how to raise your hand, I'll get to you and you can ask the question live. So there are going to be two breaks, one a 15-minute break at 10:30, my time is 10:30 Pacific, and then at 11:45, just a little 5-minute comfort break before we head into the panel. So I want to thank, first of all, thank the BC Support Group Council for making sure this workshop happened, and the Prostate Cancer Foundation office staff, Richelle, Leah, and all the gang over there. And of course, to our facilitators and panelists. We said we've got 70 some odd people. We had registrants from 134, and I'd give you an idea where they came from. We had 13 from Alberta, 67 from BC, because it's a big mature support group, 1 from Illinois, 3 from New Brunswick, 4 from Newfoundland, 3 from Nova Scotia, 1 from Northwest Territories, 1 from New York. Ontario had 27, Quebec 7, Saskatchewan 1, and 1 from Spain. But I want to let the speakers know who's out here. So Richelle, if we can do a little poll, if you can throw the poll up, and this will allow all of us to vote on something. Here are the 2 questions we're asking you, and all you have to do is click yes or no. Are you a member of a prostate cancer support group? Please click yes or no. Has your support group been meeting during COVID? Or you can just click yes or no, or you can just, I'm not a member of a support group yet. So click on both of those, and instantly, Richelle will give us the results, I hope. This is called, we used to use this system way back in the analog days, called an audience response system. Zoom has now made it easier for us. So I guess
close it up in just a second here. Okay, 3, 2, 1. There we go.
86% are a member of a group. 69%, 69, that's high. I thought you can continue to meet during COVID. And 11% aren't a member yet. So we might decide to use this little poll deal again. Anyways, let's get going. Just I've got something to say about each speaker, but you've got a description there. I'm not going to read that description. If you can read about the credits of those who are speaking to us. I want to tell you about one fellow, though, our first speaker. When I hear him talk, I get a little weepy almost. You see, when I was 20, I sailed to Australia and I hitchhiked around the country. And I hear an Australian voice now and I get a little weepy because it was such a fabulous trip for me. And that Australian accent comes out of a fellow named Dr. John Oliffe. John is, well, he was a famous Aussie rules player in Melbourne when he was a child. And now he's trying to understand American football, and he's chosen the Denver Broncos to try and understand that game. I got to tell you, John, when's the last time the Broncos won the Super Bowl? Are you alive?
Oh yeah, recent, like with Peyton Manning is 2015, 16, yeah.
No, you do know your stuff. Okay, John Oliffe, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot. Richelle, I'm just going to share my screen.
Perfect.
Great. So it's always a pleasure to chat with you. Always enjoy these gigs. And again, I'm talking about something I have experience with, but I have absolutely no expertise, right? So just that's my disclaimer. I'm simply sharing some perspectives and offering some ideas for leading your support group, through COVID-induced changes and challenges, over the next 20 minutes. So now that I've lowered your expectations, I think it's really important to say I'm super keen to hear from the wisdom of the group. Having just had 20 minutes with you prior to this presentation on Zoom, much of what I'm about to say, you clearly already know, or you know parts of it. So, I think there's a lot of wisdom to share within the group about, some of the Zoom aspects, which is something that I will talk to a little bit today. Also, to that end, I'm not wedded to the idea of getting through all the slides. I'm happy to have a conversation and have questions and comments. And so I spoke to Richelle, and she's going to be what I would call a sweeper or a spotter. And so if you had a question, you might raise a hand with an emoji, you might put a question into the chat box, and then she can cue me to stop, and we can break away from the slides and have a broader conversation. And I'm happy to do that. The reason I've got a spotter, and I'd suggest this for your groups as well, is that I'm blinded to you right now because I'm working on a screen. I can see my slide and I can also see my script. So again, just to give a shout out. So Richelle, thanks for doing that, and don't hesitate to jump in and just stop me, because as I say, I'm happy to stop as we go through. I think, by way of background, I think it's important to preempt the parts that I'll talk to today. But let me say, the world certainly has changed. It's about a year to the day that we were sent home from UBC. The faculty and staff were pushed off, and we were told that we needed to work and teach from home. And for about 3 weeks, everything got cancelled. It's like no one knew what to do. So all of my meetings, all the things that I would typically do kind of just stalled with that summons to head home. And then something strange happened. Zoom showed up. And all of a sudden I had Zoom meetings, I had Zoom seminars, I had Zoom classes, Zoom presentations, I had Zoom media interviews, I had Zoom research interviews, I presented at prostate cancer support groups through Zoom, and on the weekends I had Zoom drinks, but that's probably a different presentation. But just to say, Zoom just sort of took it over, the whole thing. I think the phrase I heard most during 2020 was, "You're on mute." So within that context, I share some ideas about leadership of prostate cancer support groups in a virtual world, Zoom or similar. So before we get into that, I want to say that the world really did change. If you think about it, we've lost about 25% of our restaurants in Vancouver, 15% rise in vacant offices in the downtown sector. We've endured physical separation, and to be frank, we've really lost control of our freedoms, and many of us lost control of our social and physical connections. So I talk a lot about anxiety because it's typically characterized by uncertainty and usually related to the future. And, so it might be about work, might be about your purpose, it might be about your routine, but we've all really been dislocated from those values. And I think that's important both as leaders of groups, but also in anticipating guys and their partners coming to the groups for what they might be feeling, what they might be wanting to talk about. There's a real uncertainty on a bunch of levels. Depression is when we kind of think back on things. We kind of, our retrospection, and we regret things, and we kind of ruminate on those things. The weird thing about COVID is that it's created time for that. So when you kind of lock down and you're a bit anxious about the future, things can often creep in where you're thinking about the past, the things that you might have done better, the things that could have been better, and those sorts of things. So I'm not doom and glooming us here, but I'm saying that those things really do encroach on folks, you know, and especially in the context of prostate cancer that I'll talk to. The other thing is, I mean, I don't know how it's been for you all, but I've been locked down in the domestic sphere for some time, and it's been a bit different. And so even the best of partnerships can be tested by sharing a small space over a long period of time, which is now a year. So my circumstance, we've had, Deb and I have both been working from home, fighting over internet, you know, to do our jobs and Wi-Fi and things. So there's been some things in that way too that were kind of unprecedented. It's interesting that, you know, there is some data that suggests there's a backlog of divorce proceedings waiting in Canadian courts. And some of them are actually attributed to COVID casualties. So like I say, I don't want to doom and gloom it here, but I just want to say that a lot has changed. And I would say a lot has changed, especially for guys, in terms of oftentimes men are out in the public area, less so in the domestic area, you know, sort of out and about. And I think it's really curtailed some of that. And it does bear out in a lot of the research that we've done about Canadian men in the context of COVID. So we surveyed more than 400 guys between the ages of 18 and 80, and 79% of those guys suggested their mental health had been negatively impacted by COVID. 51% reported moderate financial stress. 37% said that that COVID had a negative effect on their relationship with their intimate partner. Nearly a third of respondents who were in a relationship reported that they'd engaged in some type of abuse, primarily verbal abuse, towards their intimate partner during COVID-19. So more than a quarter of the guys said that they had inflicted, you know, abuse on an intimate partner, but also more than a quarter of the guys said they had experienced abuse from a partner, primarily verbal abuse. And just under half of the guys who responded suggested that they had thought about suicide. So, you know, guys that weren't in a relationship were amongst the most likely to have anxiety, depressive symptoms, and suicidal thoughts. So just to say that it really is, you know, an interesting time, you know, in terms of COVID and the effects that it has. And prostate cancer changed too, because it's interesting, compared to the general population, the levels of anxiety, depression, and suicidality in men who have prostate cancer is higher. So we're higher than the general population anyway, and then you layer on all things COVID. So the idea that, you know, telehealth consults, concerns about being immunocompromised, being susceptible to COVID, worries about being vaccinated, comorbidities in tandem, you know, with prostate cancer. So overall, I would argue that for you and for many of the guys who are attending your group and their partners by extension, they're experiencing an acute threat on what is often experienced as a chronic illness. So, you know, it's changed the nature of the conversations, and it's changed the nature of your audience, and it's changed you. But I'd also say that, you know, prostate cancer support groups have always had a really nice core business. And my argument would be that that business hasn't changed. I would say it's same. The difference is probably the platform that we're doing it in. But if we think about what's the same, the benefits of prostate cancer support groups, you know, I've been spruiking them for many years. you know, you do an amazing job of affirming experience. You listen and you share experiences. You offer mutual help, this reciprocity of exchange, if you will. You know, you host healthcare experts, facilitate Q&As that they wouldn't get in any other place. You give advice, you don't advise. And it's really important in the COVID context as well. The advice you give is about the research to look at, the due diligence about making decisions, making an informed decision, getting a second opinion, navigating the healthcare system and services. You teach the language of prostate cancer, PSAs, Gleason scores, all of it. That core business hasn't changed. The other bit that you do so incredibly well is you connect people. So your networks do an amazing job at support groups. In-person support groups are now online. That business hasn't changed. You provide a base for people. You know, some people drop in, you know, other folks stay a long time. There's guys who come in and they're one and done experience because they got what they needed and they moved on. But I'd argue the core benefits are still the leaders' goals, you know, amid the changes that have been imposed by COVID. I'm really keen, you know, to hear from the group, maybe in the chat box, and happy to have a conversation about the other things, because I've listed 6 things there that the groups do really well, and I believe they're all transferable to COVID times and Zoom platforms, but deeply interested to know what else might be in there that's worked especially well or has moved across that you see as core business of the group. Richelle, I'll keep going and you just tap me if and when we're ready to stop. Sound okay?
Sounds good.
Okay. The thing that is different is Zoom. You know, the platform has been a massive difference for all of us. And so you're likely, you know, as you likely know, there is a difference between management and leadership. Like leadership, a lot of people are seduced by, like, because they think it's vision and the idea that you are outward facing and you project an ideal and then you enact the vision, execution of it. But most of us know that leadership really is about management. Management is operations. It's really the context of the prostate cancer support groups. There is and always was and always will be a lot of management, the day-to-day operations, the work of getting it done, the work of bringing a group together, providing content, you know, communications. So really good management in Zoom looks pretty much the same as what it does in person. The principles still apply. So if you want others to be comfortable, you really do need to be at ease. So you don't have to be expert, you know, you just have to be at ease with the technology and open to what you don't know and just willing to work through it. You need to be positive. You don't need to be Pollyanna. Rather, you kind of got to be positive that Zoom is fine, because after all, it's what we've got at the moment and we're working with it. We don't have an alternative. So the goals of connecting are possible, you know, with information and with others, you know, they're attainable with everyone's buy-in. But if you're leading and you're leading from the front, people will pick things up. They might ask explicit questions of the group, from the group to the leaders. And so you're leading from the front, not really that different to the in-person stuff. Typically, prostate cancer support groups get ease and positivity from being prepared. In my experience, when I've seen leaders, you know, it's when they know the dashboard, you know, they know how to start things, the chats, the emojis, the recording options, which in the front half before we started this, in that half hour, it's clear that many of you know those things. But even like today, when Richelle got us to put in our location, that was new for me. So you learn a lot from other people as you go. So as a leader, you can orientate people, you know, really well to the different things that you can do within Zoom. The breakout rooms have worked really well. We've used these in teaching, and our groups are around 26, 28 students, and then we'll break out into the breakout rooms. Prostate Cancer Support Group's been breaking out via treatment modalities for years. And of course, that's something you can do with the groups. You can assign people to the groups in the breakout rooms, and then you can travel through each one of those groups and then bring them back to the core. The feedback we got from students that we worked with in that way was so positive about the breakout rooms, because it allowed them to have what they felt like were more confined or more freeing kind of conversations, because there was a smaller number of people. You know, like today, we're batting 80 and up on the participation, which is great at one level, but at another level, it silences some of us because we don't feel, you know, like we can really put a hand up and chime in. So again, you know, it's just those small groups, you know, kind of help the talk, a bit of an elixir, so to speak. So it's one of the things that you can definitely think about. The benefits of Zoom, you know, I think in a broader sense have included, you know, reduced travel time for participants, you know, and attendees. Really important. We've done some research, you know, using Zoom to interview people, you know, and it's really interesting. People, when they are at home, also seem very comfortable talking. So there is a real benefit there for a lot of folks. One, they don't have to travel. Two, they're at home and they're, you know, around familiar kind of things at home. You know, and the other good thing with Zoom is that you can record the meeting and you can hang it on a server, make it available for folks who couldn't make the meeting live, which I think is a real value. You know, we've grappled with that with the in-person meetings over time. And again, as I mentioned, those breakout sessions can be incredibly important. The other thing I kind of like with it is it really is accessible by a whole bunch of different devices. So I see there's a few people that are on their iPhones that are on the call today. Really helpful. You can be traveling. I've done, you know, Zoom meetings, you know, in transit, you know, between locations, and it can be really, really helpful. So, you know, it really does work that way. Another thing I saw the other day that might be of interest to you, you know, and you've got a couple of breaks today, is that you can play a video during the break. So, you know, I think it's important to schedule breaks. Sometimes we just power through these meetings, but to schedule a break, you could still put on a video and play it through for everyone just as a break. And it might be a music video, it might be just something of interest, you know, something to get a conversation going, just to mark a bit of a punctuation in the Zoom kind of live stuff. Some of the Zoom challenges, I think, you know, myself, a lot of us talk about being zoomed out. There's a lot of work with this, and it usually relates to preparation. I mean, camera placement's pretty important to try and, you know, sort of be able to project an image of yourself that people can see wholly. So, you know, some of that work is one of the things. Visual representations of others. And there's this thing that we are constantly bumping up against, and it's called Zoom lag. And it's about 1.2 seconds. So the delay on me speaking to you is 1.2 seconds. There's also a discordance between my facial expression and what I'm saying. And it feels choppy. So when we get fatigued after an hour of Zoom, it's because we're working so much harder to understand and engage the content that's being shared and to get the conversation. So, you know, there's some things that we really want to pay attention to. And I'd just say, as a leader, it's key to have a spotter, because like I say, I'm blinded to you at the moment. So Richelle hopefully is going through all the tiles, just getting a look at the people who've got their camera on to make sure we've got some engagement there. Because if you've got a spotter who maybe clues you that that's not happening, that we're not really engaging people, we might cut to a plan B. We might have something worked out where we just cut into a conversation and bring the group back in, because there is a limit to the chalk and talk that you can do on Zoom. It wears people out. And that's exactly what I'm doing at the moment, is a chalk and talk sort of situation where at 19 minutes, you know, you're probably starting to, you know, fade a little bit, might be ready for some dialogue. So just in terms of risk management, you know, think about your audience. Are they getting more tired than energized? Are they getting a social high? Like, part of what you do so well in in-person groups is you bring people together to have conversations they might not ordinarily be able to have. So again, thinking about those breakout groups, thinking about how you facilitate the conversation. The 30 minutes prior to the actual official start of the meeting today was a lovely example of how people get together, chat, just shoot the breeze. Really, really helpful. That's a part of the social high. Constant interruptions, you know, they fuel a lack of concentration. So I came into the office today to do this presentation because the Wi-Fi at home is, you know, it's hard. The minute I stream on Zoom, Deb can't do, you know, internet stuff. We can't have both going at the same time. A real challenge. So I'm Ethernetted here. So I've got a direct line, and it's typically much better than relying on Wi-Fi that, in our experience at home, it drops in and out. So thinking about, you know, how you can minimize the interruptions. So those technical and internet problems that leave a lot of people feeling angry and frustrated with the medium. And I think, you know, there's this feeling sometimes of confusion and awkwardness during a meeting. Again, the 30 minutes we spent prior to coming on the call, there was some absolute, you know, gems of information about different things you can do within the meeting. The poll at the front end with Robb, you know, a couple of questions just to engage folks. Really, really helpful things. And you can do them outside of the meeting. My experience is when I'm running a class or in a meeting, people are a bit reticent to say, hey, how do you do this? So you can do little mini tutorials, you know, in some ways to just help folks orientate, you know, as separately, because it's as easy as jumping on a call, so to speak. The rippling effects, you know, COVID will end. At least that's my hopeful self saying it will end. But the transitions, they're going to continue post-COVID. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind that as we return to that kind of in-person piece, there are parts of Zoom that might get carried forward. You know, if 2020 was the year of COVID and 2021 is the year of procurement of vaccines in Canada, then I reckon 2022 will have some important content too, and it'll be about maybe the new normal. So consider that blend of prostate cancer and COVID vaccine, post-COVID information, as you've always done with the support groups. You've done an amazing job of blending prostate cancer specific things and things that are more generally related to health. And now I think, you know, the continuation of that with a definite nod to COVID is important. The groups they've always done a really good job of advice. I would caution the groups to continue not to correct misinformation. I would say point people, like you've always done, to reputable information sources. You've always relied on empirical evidence. Many of the group leaders, such as yourself, will talk about specific articles and talk to specific things that have an empirical base. The media with COVID has been very, very challenging in a context of anxious and anxiety provoking COVID situations. The media really has fueled a lot of that. So again, it's not about correcting that information, that misinformation that's there, that conjecture, but it's about pushing people to reliable sources and summating reliable sources as a way of getting the conversation that you've always done, which has been reputable and really, you know, helpful for people. There's a few leadership blind spots, and I'll finish with this, just to say, you know, we often assume as leaders that, you know, others know what we're talking about. And sometimes content-wise as well, we assume they know things. So I just encourage you to think about the tools that you've got, and the ways in which you are re-educating guys who are, and partners who are new to the support groups. And you will get folks who will be new in the context of Zoom and Zoom meetings. So again, just being aware that not everyone on the call will know everything about the content or about Zoom in order to be able to fully engage. The other thing that happens in Zoom, well, at least for me, a few times is I feel like I'm moving too fast. Like the pacing gets harder because I can't read the room. I can't see you. And so I just go. And I kind of, I'm through the slides. And so the rear view vision is really important. So I've got Richelle as a spotter today. So we're trying to get some live information and read you to engage you at some level. And I encourage you to do that with your groups. Always have a spotter, who can kind of just get a bit of a temperature of the room, so to speak, because you're just missing that information that you would normally have. And I think the rear view vision is really important after the meeting to reflect on, what seemed to go well, what I'd change next time, what I need to build into this, what is and isn't working. Finally, just my closing words is first and foremost is to say thanks for your leadership. These are volunteer positions. These are incredibly important work, but it's hard work. And I think perhaps it's especially hard with COVID and being pushed to a virtual platform like Zoom. My preparation for teaching in the fall, like last fall, was 3 months. Normally I'm like, a couple of weeks, I dust off the lectures, walk back into the room and say the same stuff. Probably shouldn't have said that, but no, I do update. But just to say, there's a lot of work goes with putting things in a virtual format, a ton of work. So, hats off to you for making the transition. It's testimony today that we've swung upward of 80, with big registrations of 130 for an online forum. So in some ways, there's this argument that it pushes us forward in a good way. The other thing I'd like to say is that, as leaders, you're probably at your best when you've got energy, and you've probably got energy when you've conserved a little bit, when you've got a bit left in the tank, and you haven't expended it on other things, and you're not worried about what you've got to do next. So, always, when we used to tell travel stories, I always, used to say, that I like it when they say put the oxygen on yourself first, because you can't help anyone else if you haven't got a decent saturation going. So, just to say, look after yourselves, because you're not immune to the COVID challenges. And you are trying to smooth it for people and get the conversations that will help folks along the way, just as you're doing with prostate cancer. But I think it's really important at this time to just be aware that you've got to look after yourself in these contexts to be the great leaders that you are, to continue to be the great leaders you are. Genuine thanks for the opportunity again to have a chat. I imagine we've got a couple of minutes for questions and comments. I'd really value a bit of a dialogue. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
John, excuse me, John.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's Rob. We've only got a couple of minutes, but and you've covered this a little bit, but I think after everybody's got the poke in the arm, what mood, what ideas should we travel into the future with as far as Zoom goes? I mean, I would think some people are probably going to say enough of Zoom. We can meet personally now. What? Yeah.
So I think it'll be, Rob, I reckon different groups will choose different things. I don't think that Zoom will ever replace in person. I think there's a genuine benefit, and I think it's been pointed out by COVID and the lockdown that we kind of need to be able to be in a room and see each other and talk to each other, and that kinesthetic value. So I think there will be some things we might get some efficiencies. For example, if I was a leader and there was 3 or 4 of us, we could jump on a Zoom call and have a quick chat about the meeting, that was going to be in person. There might be some efficiencies around some of those things, for leaders. But I don't anticipate it. I mean, and again, this will vary, but I don't anticipate it as being something that's going to replace the in-person.
Good. Well, thank you very much, Dr. John Oliffe, a Denver Broncos fan and speaker who makes me emotional. Thank you, John.
No worries, Rob.
Much appreciated. Now,
Okay.
any questions, if you folks want to put them into the chat, I'll try and pick them up as we finish each speaker. Here's one, though, not on topic with John, but it's from James V. It's odd how men looking at men's health issues used to be viewed as selfish and self-absorbed. I'm glad that sociology is changing now and men are speaking up about their PSA, their health, and their feelings. Good one. Okay, our next speaker, I hope she's here. I can't tell right now.
Sorry, I just wanted to say something real quick, Rob. We do have a couple of questions here, but because we have to kind of keep our program moving, Dr. Oliffe, would it be okay for them to email you their questions?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no problems at all.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay. Have a good day.
You
Thanks,
too,
John.
thank you so much.
Okay, our next speaker, a lady named Glenda Standeven, and some of you maybe met her at our live conferences over the last few years. She's going to talk about empathetic communication with your group, and that is, I guess, staying connected in a virtual environment. But a little bit about her first. She's a cancer survivor, and she's a facilitator of sorts. She used to keep pretty busy out there, but COVID has kind of slowed that down. But she is an adventurous girl. She's into whitewater and snorkeling and swimming. And if you had to say, here's one wish you can have it today, I think it would be, she'd say, send me to the Caribbean because I want to go swimming with the turtles and the stingrays. So, Glenda Standeven, thanks for being here. You're on.
I'm happy to be here. And I believe I'm going to use the same format that John did. And if there's any questions, direct them to Richelle. Richelle, interrupt me by all means anytime through this. And yeah, using empathy, I think you had mentioned, Rob, is one of the focuses I'd like to deal with today, and how to be showing empathy rather than sympathy when we have our meetings. And Zoom, because it is so distant, looking at people's faces is really, really important. When I look around and I'm watching the screen, and we have a smaller group, maybe 20, I think, Richelle, or so, some nights, and you look at their faces and you see if how they're looking, if they're looking downcast, if they're looking bored, or John had mentioned that as well, that you have to really have someone to watch the screen and be attentive to what people are doing. If they're just looking around and not seem to be connecting with what you're talking about, draw them in. So if I see someone that looks like they're sleeping, I'll say, John Warren, how are you doing today? You look like you're kind. There you are. Hi, John. And you can have some fun. I really have found that many, many years of facilitating is to be relaxed, to be calm, to not be uncomfortable with any topic. I have had mixed groups with men and women, and I have found that men are equally receptive to being frank, and to dealing with sensitive issues and intimacy and everything that a woman talks about a little easier. Men are just as receptive, and they appreciate a forum where they can share their feelings. So having a support group that allows them to be vulnerable, allows them to be sensitive, is really important. And I think that as a facilitator, we need to really solicit that kind of environment so that you can have them come in and know that it's a safe place. Anything can be talked about, anything. And it's very different with our women's group only as partners that come in. and the things that they wish their husbands would talk about that they don't. And having a forum where you're allowed to talk about intimacy, sexual function, sexual dysfunction, all these things that sometimes don't get talked about at home, and to be able to share it with others who are experiencing perhaps the same thing, having a forum where you can be totally honest and share exactly what you're going through, your emotional needs, your psychological needs, and having Richelle as the wingman, and anything that comes up that you don't know about, you direct to the group. And if it's a more of a information question and Richelle has the answer, she's just an absolute key ingredient to a successful support group, in that she'll find the information and share it with the group. So I find the difference between a facilitator and a leader is the facilitator doesn't talk very much. We bring out the talk in all the people that are there. And being in a small screen, you'll notice I'll use my hands because you can see more with the hands. When you're in a large group and you can do bigger, grander gestures, you have the body language working for you. But on a small little screen, you have to use what you've got. So as a facilitator, I'll do this, and I'll bring in to the group with my hands, just using what I've got to work with, this small screen. So that helps them too to relax. It helps them to know that they're included. It brings out a sense of belonging, so that they could see that I'm engaging with them. So as a facilitator, it's important to let your group know that you're with them and you're listening and you're engaged. I have a very bad memory for names, so I so appreciate this format in Zoom when I can read the names and see who's here, and help so much to be able to connect and say, hi, Rob, hi, Sue, hi, James, and be able to have that just right there at the top, because you're calling on them. And to be able to do that in a group setting, to make sure that everyone is included, and to see, okay, I'm following along on my screen. It might not be the same as yours, but I'll give every single person a chance to speak. They might not want to, but they're allowed to. And it's a safe place too. So you check in and you say, how are you this week? How are you since the last time we saw you? And if you have a little notebook with you, you make notes and you say, oh, Mary is, her husband just was going in for surgery at the last meeting. You know, check in with Mary to see how she's doing with that part of the recovery now, you know, and to be able to remember and connect. If you have a large group that's always changing, that's not feasible. It's just every time you'll check in and people will bring their issues forward. I love that if you have questions, direct them to Richelle. She'll interrupt the flow to say, Glenda, there's a question for you. And I go, okay. It works if you have a really good wingman. And Richelle, you are the best. So thank you for that. It makes it much easier when you have someone who's so knowledgeable, has their finger on access to any kind of information, statistics, options, sexual issues, clinics, just terrific. Also, one of the things I really love is to share knowledge, to share. If someone has read a good book, share it. That's how we learn, is by saying, oh, this really helped me, and I want to share it with you because I think it will really help you too. So the facilitator tips and things like that I wanted to share, so much of it was covered by John already, but there are things that I do in the group. maybe we'll have, and I did send a little sheet out to Richelle that she will share with all of you with some tips and things, the difference between facilitating and the difference between being a leader. And a facilitator does not talk very much during the meeting. They will direct, and they bring out the conversation from the members there. So, I mean, I ran a support group for 12 years, and I'm sure I never shared my cancer story maybe more than twice. But by sharing their stories and connecting them to people who are similar, who have had maybe breast cancer, prostate cancer, or bone cancer, anything like that, and saying, oh, you know, would you two like to be a support to each other? You know, maybe you'd like to exchange numbers, and connecting them that way. Facilitator burnout is a very real thing, because so many people take on with the sympathy rather than the empathy, and we feel sorry for the people in our group. And that's one thing I would really caution against. We all have our crosses to bear, and we all have our rows to hoe. And I truly, that was one of the hardest lessons for me to learn, was that their burdens are theirs to carry. We can give them tools to help them with their journey, but we can't carry it for them. And facilitator burnout, very real. I managed 12 years, and I got tired of goodbyes, because the nature of a support group is people are in there who are sick. And boy, you become attached, and saying goodbye is difficult. So one of the things for self-preservation I would really, really recommend is self-care. And John touched on that, and it is so important to take care of yourself, because in my handout that Richelle will forward to you, there's a little exercise called the top 10 things. And it's one of the exercises I love to do with the group early on. And it's to just get them to list the top 10 things that make their life really important, really worth living. And maybe that'll be their pets, or their kids, their family, their travel, their home, their, you know, hobbies, all sorts of love, their faith. But very, very seldom do they put their health as the number one thing. And that was so important that everybody remembered that their health is the number one most important thing. And if you don't have that, you're not going to be able to enjoy all the other things on that list. So that was a really good exercise that we incorporate into our support group meetings, is knowing that their health is also very important, as well as their spouses. So one thing too is to be able to start your meetings on time, end your meetings on time, to have a structure within your meeting, to know that everybody's going to get a chance to talk, so that they don't misconstrue that this is just the Glenda show. It's not. It's going to be the everyone show, and they're all included in being equally important. Their opinions matter, their feelings matter. There's going to be different people that come into the group. Some are monopolizers, and I believe I've put that in my notes as well, and how to deal with all the different personalities that come in to a group. Having someone be the facilitator is key, but having someone in the wings like Richelle, who's able to steer the people to the answers they're looking for, is the perfect combination. Having a resource library, having all the things. COVID has made it a little more challenging in some ways, but also a lot of opportunity for people all across Canada. We have people in Newfoundland that come to our group support group. Well, that wouldn't happen if we were meeting live. So this is the sort of thing that COVID has given us, an opportunity to reach more people, to help more people. And the message of hope is still getting out there for all of our members. And
Glenda?
I really appreciate that. Yes,
Oh,
Rob.
we're running out of time, unfortunately, but I want to get this in. A couple of things came in chat, and this one from Gary McDonnell in North Van. The challenge to the leaders is that each member of the support group is at a different stage in their journey. So then how do you get that empathy going on when everybody's minds are in different places?
And I find that that's a very valid point. And by mentoring, having them match up with people together or people who have already been there and can lift them and answer questions as pertinent, so that they're all able to input and say, well, you know, when I had mine, this is what worked for me. And our job isn't to provide medical advice. Our job is to just support. So we can provide the medical advice through Richelle's, the sources. But as a facilitator, I can't say, oh, well, you shouldn't have done that. You should have done, you know, the brachytherapy. I would never have gone for the surgery. No, that's not our call. Everybody is there to make their own choice. And I think that was a very good point. You can partner up with someone at the same level. I find a mentorship relationship is even better. Having someone who's experienced it and share their experiences.
I'm going to move real quickly, but I want to put this, just read this from Kevin in Cranbrook. We are all on Zoom and we've been having meetings on Zoom for a year now, but I have 6 guys who need me to use Canada Post to communicate about our meetings. We can't leave this group behind. I feel that I have not served them at all over the past year. I was reminded of this in Walmart last week when a masked guy came up to me and started to tell me how he couldn't pee and had to get a TERP, and now things were better. If we were having face-to-face meeting, he would never have initiated a conversation in Walmart. Anyways.
Again, I find telephone, I wouldn't use snail mail by any means, but pick up the phone and just talk on the phone. Everybody does have a phone, I think, pretty much. And you can definitely have partnerships that have made through the group, and you can carry on that mentorship outside of the group.
Great, Glenda, thank you. It's and if for all of those who are listening, if you get a chance to see Glenda, it's worthwhile. She's a pretty strong presenter and a whole bunch of fun in the conferences we had. Thank you for the time you gave us, and we'll see you again, I hope. And now let's move on to the star of the show, Richelle Green, who's the support services manager at the Prostate Cancer Foundation. And I think she's going to talk about all the free stuff she's created for every support group.
Hi, everybody. I'm just going to share my screen. All right, so as Rob mentioned, my name is Richelle. I'm the support services manager at Prostate Cancer BC. You probably know my name from all of the emails that you get from me. And I'm just going to talk quickly about some support services that are available to our community. So before I get started, I just want to give a big thank you to these guys here. These are our BC Support Group Council. Roy Gavlin from Vernon, Gavin Soanes from the North Shore, Joe DeHoy, our chair from Campbell River, Bob Tomic from Surrey, Len Gross from Vancouver, Renee Anderson from Burnaby, and Gogs Gagnon from Comox Valley. And these are the guys that helped me put together this workshop for you today. So a big virtual round of applause for them. So I'm just going to be talking a little bit about Prostate Cancer BC and Prostate Cancer Support Canada. And then I'm going to go over some online resources and some physical resources that we have available. So one of the questions that we get a lot is how we're able to provide our support services for free from the foundation. And it's through the generosity of our supporters, both in their time and money, that we're able to do a lot of what we do. We also host 4 events each year: the Father's Day Walk Run, the motorcycle ride, West Coast Motorcycle Ride to Live, Pubs for Prostate, and what am I missing? It's a snow day. And as you can see here, we have a small staff, just the 4 of us. Shelly, our donor relations, myself and my cats, Nicole Sirachman, our events manager, and Leah LaRiviere, our wonderful executive director. So we're a grassroots charity and we have really low overhead and administrative costs, which allows us to put our resources back where they matter most, into support, awareness, and research of prostate cancer. So at the beginning of 2020, we decided to expand our support services across Canada because we felt that there was a need for it. And over the past year, we've been working with a really great group of support group leaders and representatives from different prostate cancer support groups across Canada, and created a national council to be a national voice for prostate cancer support. We also created a website called prostatecancersupport.ca, which I'll be talking a little bit about in a second. Or online resources. We have a YouTube channel. You can look us up on YouTube at prostate, or by just typing in prostate cancer BC, or you can visit our website and click on resources. And there you'll find a whole bunch of videos from our support group meetings, recordings of different experts talking on everything from sexual health to different treatment types, active surveillance, ADT, and more. So that's a great resource, not just for people looking for more information, but they're also good for support groups who aren't able to get a speaker, and you can just show that video to your group. We also have our If I Were Tom website. Excuse me. And that was created in conjunction with the foundation and Dr. Oliffe, who you heard speak earlier. And this is a website that allows you to watch different videos on different parts of the prostate cancer process. And after watching each video, you're taken to a page with related resources and tips that can help you choose your next steps. So this is a really great resource to share with your newly diagnosed patients at your group. And the Prostate Cancer Support Canada website. We created this because we were hoping to have kind of a one-stop shop for everything that's prostate cancer support in Canada. So support groups can list their group there for free. You just send the information to me and I'll have it added to the website so that you're able to be easily found. And we also have a calendar on the website that lists the support group meetings that are across Canada. You can look at the meetings by province, so you can find meetings that are close to you. You can also find ones that are just online, ones that are in person when we are able to meet in person. And yeah, there's more information on each event by just clicking on it. We also offer Zoom tutorials and assistance. So when we moved into online meetings at the beginning of COVID, we saw the need to create a tutorial for Zoom. So we have a tutorial for support group leaders to help them learn the functionalities of Zoom as a host, and also for attendees to just kind of get comfortable with all of the functions that are available via Zoom. We also have a Zoom account that we share with our support groups. So if your support group isn't able to get a subscription to Zoom to increase that free 40-minute time limit to the unlimited amount of time for your meeting, we have a account that we share with all of our support groups. We also host nationwide support group meetings. So we have our Coast to Coast group, which meets the last Tuesday of each month. And with a bigger group, we've been able to get some really great speakers, including Dr. Pippa Hawley, who's one of the top researchers in palliative care and pain management. And she's going to be talking about using cannabis for cancer care. So that meeting is going to be March 30th. And we also have our Partners in Prostate group, which is facilitated by Glenda, who you heard from just before me. And this month we're going to have Rianne Booker talking about optimizing sexual health. So these meetings are kind of neat because we get to see people from all across the country join together. And registration is available for those if you're interested. We have a monthly newsletter that we send out with meetings and events that are coming up and other resources. So you can sign up for that, and your support group members can sign up for that. And as support group leaders, this is a nice way for you to kind of contribute to your community. If you have any resources that you'd like to share, you can send them to us and we can have them included in the newsletter for you. And some of our physical resources. We have our reef knot kits, and this is something that we're really proud of at the foundation. We've been distributing them for free for almost 20 years. And over the past year, we've decided to kind of evolve the kit to include some new things, including an exercise guide and nutrition guide and passport. So this is a great resource for newly diagnosed patients and something that you might want to keep on hand at your support group to give to new members. I forgot to mention this at the beginning, but I'll be sending out these slides following the workshop, and there'll be links to everything here. So don't worry about trying to take notes or anything. We also have marketing materials that we can personalize for your group, including posters, business cards, meeting signs, and more. We heard from support group leaders that one of the struggles in running a support group is kind of getting the word out about it. So these materials are available to your group if you just email me. And last but not least, we can help you start new support groups, teams, walking clubs, and sheds. So pictured here, we have our Butts in a Boat, who are a great example of what you can do when you're just kind of creative with your group. So they have a really cool model of not only you know, being an exercise group, but they're also a support group and have become really great friends through it. And they've even had research articles published on them because it's just a really cool model. So if you have any ideas for starting groups, sheds, walking clubs, or teams, you can reach out to us and we can help you set that up. We also have this support group handbook that we can send you that has a whole bunch of information on what you'll need to get your group started. And if you just reach out to us, we're happy to help with anything. So whether you need to find a meeting place, find a speaker for your meeting, anything at all, we're happy to help. So my email address is there. And I'll send these slides out to everybody so you have this information as well.
Richelle?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's Rob. I'm just on my screen. Some of the people may have the same deal. I can't see your email address because it's white on kind of a lighter blue. So I'm just gonna.
Now it's pretty light.
Everybody probably has it, but you're Richelle, RICHELLE at prostatecancerbc.ca.
Yeah, that's right. So that's it for me. Thank you so much for joining us today and for being a part of this workshop. And I'll hand it back to Rob to take us to our break.
Okay, we are going to have a break. 15 minutes. So wherever you are, whatever time zone you're in, to find out what time it is, add 15 minutes. And at that point, we're going to join you again. So we'll see you in 15. So we have a couple of speakers here that are going to talk about the spiritual, emotional, and the physical suffering of prostate cancer. And as they'll also talk about research in the changing of individual and group psychotherapy. They call their presentation, Speaking the Unspoken. And there's a couple of doctors, they're going to do that for us, Dr. David Kuhl and Dr. Kevin Lutz. Now I'm hoping that you've all read their professional credits, but I want to tell you a little bit more about the human beings. Say, Dr. David Kuhl, where are you, David? Wave to us now. Okay, there you go. Apparently, you like puttering around the house and painting and doing plumbing and all that stuff, and you don't have to haul in the real expensive professional dudes. You like the outdoors, you run your cycle. There's a theme through here about all our speakers seem to be pretty healthy. You run your cycle, you Zoom with friends. You're a pun meister. I'm calling you a pun meister because he'll throw some puns in, I'm sure, during his presentation. But interestingly, he learned classical piano, and he's now trading that in for jazz piano. So one live meeting, we'll get you on the keyboard. Second guy, Dr. Kevin Lutz. Where are you, Kevin? There you are. I think I see you waving. Yeah. An outdoor guy too, a rock climber. He told me I learned something about him about split board. Split board is a if you're skiing or you're boarding, you can just use one board, or you pull them apart and you've got a pair of skis. They must be big, fat, short skis though, I would reckon. And he likes board games. He says he's a bit of a neat freak. He's raised his daughter on his own. She's about to graduate. And the dream would be for Kevin to sail to Polynesia and do some kite surfing. I was just in Tahiti last year. If you're going to go there, bring your money. Okay. Dr. David Kuhl and Dr. Kevin Lutz, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Rob. We'll introduce ourselves first as just a way of going. The introduction was appreciated. I'll just let everybody know what my background is. I have a PhD from UBC, and I've been running groups of various kinds with people who have medical and related mental health concerns for many years, since about 2008, and currently run a lot of programs, especially group programs, with people who've experienced various forms of trauma and stress. I worked for several years with the Prostate Cancer Supportive Care Program in Vancouver, and over that 3 years, I ran a clinic where I saw people individually, as well as ran a group program with David on which we collected some significant research. So I'll turn it over to David.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you, Rob, for the introduction. I wish we were in the same room, which is probably how many people start their talks. I see familiar faces, I see familiar names from across the country, and pleased to join you today. I started all of this work as a family doctor, and then decided, because of the work that I was doing, I wanted to understand not just the physical issues that people were experiencing, but wanted also to have a deeper understanding of the psychological and spiritual effect that illness had on them. So went back to school and studied psychology, and in that context began to work with a variety of groups and of men. And the work we did with prostate cancer is based on that. Had to do with men in the military, police officers, firefighters, and I still continue to do some of that work. And it's also where Kevin and I met and began to do some work together. And how did I get to this work? It's probably a combination of being a family doctor, as well as I then started the palliative care program at St. Paul's many, many years ago, and began to realize that disease is much more than a disease. And looking specifically at prostate cancer, it really is an experience that is fundamentally male, and that in it, in terms of one's quality of life, it's really affected, and it has an impact on who we are as men. And it has to do with things, as all of you know too well: bowel function, urinary incontinence, sexual dysfunction, diminished penile length, feminization, grief, anxiety, depression, things that alter our bodies, things that alter our sense of self, and also our function, and alters our relationships with people who are important to us. These effects are often deemed to be very private, and for many men unspeakable. That, in combination with the work that we've done with hundreds of men in military and first responders, we realize that men are very private and often resist asking for help. They talk about problems after they're solved. They're taught to be stoic, taught to be strong, taught to keep it to themselves. And especially when features of our lives might include grief or shame, fear, or a sense of vulnerability, often we're even more closed and alone or isolated than we might be if those features weren't present. So all of this work actually started thanks to John Oliffe, who isn't here anymore, but he got a very significant research grant for a variety of projects, and looking at prostate cancer and the possibility of running groups for men addressing some of the specific issues was one of those projects. So we actually ran 5 groups as pilot projects, 6 actually, 3 in Vancouver, 2 in Halifax, and 1 in Montreal. And I see there may be people from the group present I won't name them, but it's good to see you on board. Those projects were really very significant. And I'll tell you, with the permission of one of the participants, why I continued with this work. In one of our very first groups, one of the people that heard about the program asked whether he could participate or join the group. And I said, well, you know, usually we only accept people, and there were, as you do with pilot project and university research projects, there were people inclusion criteria, one of which was that you had to have had your diagnosis for a year. And this gentleman had only had his diagnosis for 6 months, and he was pleading. And he said, you've got to let me in. I want to be part of this group. And he said, I know you might have fear because I might learn things that upset me. He said, but I've got a great therapist, a great psychiatrist, a great family doctor, a great minister, a great support in my family and my church. So we bent the rule and had him join us. He gave me permission, by the way, to tell this story. At the end of the group, when we were discussing what the value of the group, he said, one of the last people to participate in sort of the conclusion, he said, I'll tell you, if I hadn't joined this group, I wouldn't be here. And I said, excuse me? He said, no, I was ready to end my life because of the despair I was feeling with regard to the impact of the illness on my life, on my sexuality, my sense of sex, and all of the things that I used to define myself as a man. I had decided that I could do this with my motorcycle, and I determined which road, which curve, which rainy day. And it was because of this group, and not because of you as facilitators, that is as important to me. It's because I'm with a group of other men who have experienced very similar things, and they gave me hope, because some of these men are way beyond the 1 year. They're at the 5 and 10 year mark. So they've given me hope that life can go on. So that was early on, and I realized how significant, regardless of any statistical significance, that the work that we were doing with men had a very powerful effect on who they were as men, as individuals. So our purpose today is we're gonna tell you things you've already heard this morning. I joined you, pardon me, while John was talking, so I know that some of the things that we're going to talk about will be similar to ones you've talked about. And our goal is to enhance your skills for some of you who might just be starting, to provide some new skills perhaps, or understanding about how groups work and why they're important. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to actually invite you and divide you into a very small group. Richelle's going to help us with that so that you'll get to meet people from other parts of the country. And bear with us. Kevin and I have not taught together or presented together through Zoom. So we hope there won't be too many glitches. So our goal and our hope is that out of this, you will either have the skills that you already know affirmed, or perhaps some new ways of working with your groups. And we do hope to get to the end point where you then will also have opportunity to ask questions, because we really hope to be as relevant to your work as we could be. So long introduction, that's the context and the work that we're doing.
So the first place that we thought it would be important to start, because we are talking about running groups, is some of the foundational pieces of what is important when putting a group together. And so this has been part of the research that I did for my PhD, and a significant part of the learning that I have gone through over many, many years of running group programs, 15 years of it, and I think everybody should have a handout. Would have been sent out by Richelle. If you don't, that's okay. You will get it eventually. But just identifying what the most important factors are in creating a group according to literature. And the most important one, and this is across the board in all fields of group work and psychology, group cohesiveness is the single most important factor in positive outcomes for groups. And what essentially that means is you can determine whether or not a group will have a beneficial effect by whether or not the people in the group feel as though they are a wanted member of that group. as though they feel included in the group, as though they feel trust and trusted inside of the group, and as though they feel connected to the people. So group cohesiveness is the most important thing. The other ones are interpersonal learning. So one of the great things about having a group of men together is that everybody in the room has life experience. And this is an important element because one of the things that we're going to spend some time talking about later is the fact that before an illness comes along, the men in the room are men first. And what comes along with long, rich lives is a lot of knowledge and experience. And so with that knowledge and experience, we get to relate that to one another. And that's a significant part of creating a relationship. So that interpersonal learning piece is a foundational piece in creating a solid group. The next one is this notion of universality. And what that means is I'm not alone. What's happening to me? I'm not the only one. The way I feel about this, it's not just me. Somebody else has a sense of what's going on for me. It cannot be stated, and I'm going to quote David here because I get this from him. Every time I say this, I hear his voice in my head. It is a basic human need to feel seen, heard, and understood by the people around us. And that notion of universality is exactly that. It's this idea that other people have a sense of what's going on for me and I understand what's going on for them. And then finally, this experience of installation of hope. And that's what David just actually talked about with the participant of the group who came forward and said it was important for me to be in the group because I learned from other people who are further down the road. The experience of there being something potentially in the future for me, that it's not as bad as I sometimes feel it might be. And I'm not saying that there's not suffering and challenges along the way. That's not the message. The notion of hope is that it's not always going to be exactly like it is now. Things can change, things can evolve.
And sometimes, I'm just going to interrupt you, Kevin. Sometimes what I do in summarizing these, when I'm working with the group, I use the 3 words: safety, inclusion, and trust. So that it must be, and I think that in one of the previous sessions, one of you asked about men coming to the groups at at different points of illness, and that's where the person that comes for the first time needs to feel safe amongst men who might know each other and might know each other very well, so that in terms of them beginning to express their own sense of their psychological or spiritual pain or angst, they need to feel safe and feel included, and that the things that are going on are also trustworthy. And one of the ways, and it was mentioned earlier as well, in terms of trust, and trust happens, one of the ways that happens is if the facilitators actually do what they say they're going to do. We start at 10 o'clock, we say we're going to start at 10 o'clock, we start at 10 o'clock. We're going to end at 11, we end at 11. And if something's going really, really well at 9:55 and you realize that you won't be able to finish at 10, you address that, so that you bring it out into the open. You don't try to sneak a quick ending so you can close it. You say, it looks like we might be going over time, can people stay? So that there's escape clauses and forgiveness clauses, but the features of safety, inclusion, and trust are essential to men feeling like they belong.
Yeah. Thanks, David. And within that safety, inclusion, and trust is the experience of secure emotional expression. As men in the world, we're often taught that we get exactly 2 emotions. We get to be happy and we get to be angry. And the idea that those are the only 2 things that men experience is, of course, it's nonsense. The opportunity to express what is actually going on for me is incredibly important in my sense of well-being and validation as a human being in the world. And that's part of that safety, inclusion, and trust. It's okay to do that in a group where I'm not going to be chastised or judged for what I happen to say. So when we begin a program, or sorry, when we begin a group, at the beginning and end of each day, we do a thing that we call checking in and checking out. And what the checking in and checking out actually looks like is the very beginning of it might be just, a scale question of on 0 to 10, how much energy do you have right now? Or, what do you need to say to be present today? But the idea is everybody in the room has an opportunity to say something. It can be very brief, but that signals the beginning of the process of the group. And that, if there's something on my mind that I need to leave outside of the group, I can say, this is something that happened for me today. I'm just going to leave that outside so I can be present. And at the end of the day, we also do a thing called checking out. And the reason that we do that is 2 reasons. 1, we need to end the group for the day. And 2, we want to consolidate some of the experience of the day. And so one of the things that we would often say at the end of a day is, what is one thing from today that you're going to take away that will be supportive of you moving forward? And then also, potentially one thing you're going to do to take care of yourself after this, if it's a particularly difficult day for whatever reason. So,
And what
there,
go ahead.
No, go ahead, David.
All I was going to add to this, again, once everybody's had a voice, it's more likely that they'll also talk about things that are important to them. So that I'm very aware that it's easy and it's really essential. The groups that you run it's really essential in terms of the information that's provided about cancer, about treatment, about options. So it's very important that people do that. It's equally important for some of your sessions where people the participants can begin to talk about their emotional response to their illness. And that's where the safety is. Often it's easier to feel comfortable in our knowledge level and less comfortable in how we are feeling about some of the knowledge we might be hearing or about our own experience of the disease itself.
So what we do at the very beginning of any group, and this is a way to create the safety, inclusion, and trust that David spoke about, or the group factors that Irving Yalom talks about, who is he's considered the grandfather of group psychotherapy. So any kind of support group will include these as well. Is we create a set of group guidelines, and so I'm assuming that most people do some version of this. There is an acronym that was created by, who created it, David? It was you and Douglas and Paul?
A group of us, yeah.
Yeah, created this acronym called CENTRE, C-E-N-T-R-E. And it's a very, very nice way of creating a set of basic group guidelines that include C for confidentiality. That means anything that people talk about is going to stay inside of the room. What happens in the group stays in the group. Equal airtime. This piece is important, and this is actually part of the job of the facilitator. And what that means is that everybody in the room has an equal opportunity to speak up. It's very, very likely that in any group, somebody's going to be more talkative and some others are going to be a little bit quieter, and that's fine. It's not that everybody has to say the same number of things. It's just that everybody has to have an opportunity to speak up. So if one member is particularly vocal, to say, just hold on a second, I haven't heard from this person over here. Or if you haven't heard from somebody, to say, I was just wondering if you wanted to contribute to this. And people have the right to say no, and we'll get to that. The N in CENTRE stands for non-judgmental, and that is not being judgmental of one another. So that means coming from a place of curiosity, essentially. It's impossible to not be judgmental. We make judgments all the time, of course, but to actually be more curious about where somebody's perspective is coming from. And also about ourselves. So when I'm a member of a group or a course or a social situation, some things might cross my mind and I might think, oh, I don't want to ask that. I don't want to look stupid. Probably if I'm thinking it somebody else's. So what I would say to any group is be non-judgmental of others, be curious, but also be non-judgmental of yourself. If you have a question, probably many other people are thinking it is important. Timeliness, as David said, please be timely. That means move into, make sure that when you say you're going to begin, when you say you're going to end. The right to pass means not everybody has to speak up. And engagement, which means be as engaged as you possibly can be in the span of the program. So when things are distracting me, whether it's my physical comfort or something happening outside, or if this is a new experience to me, I might have difficulty being completely present, and that's okay. We just ask that people be as engaged as they can be. And then we add additional features to this as well.
And one of the things that we might do is ask people if there's anything else that they want to add. And some of the things that we've had to look at in terms of leading groups is to say, we're all sitting in chairs right now. Some of you may have injuries or aches and pains that it would be more comfortable for you to be standing up. So it's important to give members an option. And, you know, we're speaking, directing a lot of our conversations, our words right now to men. We realize also that there are some groups, or maybe all groups, would include partners to attend meetings. It doesn't change the process. It doesn't change the guidelines or the check-in. Everybody is included in that circle. And we would work actually hard to sit in a circle rather than in rows. Sometimes in rows work well for lectures, but circles work much better for groups. So we would just include everybody in the circle of that group. So what we're going to do right now is we're actually going to start an exercise, and we're going to invite you to participate. And this is actually one of the exercises that we use in the groups that we lead. The purpose is to get everybody to experience something perhaps a little differently from what you might have experienced previously. So you're going to be divided into groups of 3 arbitrarily by Richelle. We'll press a button, and I think Zoom will assign you to join 2 other people. And what we're going to invite you to do, and I'm going to put Kevin on the spot, because as soon as I've explained this, I'm going to ask Kevin to do it as a demonstration in terms of how we function. So I'm going to ask each of you to introduce yourselves to the other 2 people, and then to tell them your name. What does your name mean, and how did you get it? And you can use all of your names if you like. If you have 2 or 3 or 4, you can use your first, middle, and last name, but certainly include your first. And if you're so inclined and you understand what some of the other names mean or how you got them, would also be of value. So Kevin, I'm going to get you to be the demonstration project, and please, how did you get your name? What does it mean? And any other information you might want to give us about your name.
Sure. Can I say one thing about why we might do this exercise first, David?
Please. Yep.
So first of all, the rule is never ask your group to do anything you wouldn't do yourself. And so thanks for putting me on the spot. The second piece is, this is the kind of conversation that many people may not have had. So it primes people to start having conversations and thinking about things in new and different ways. And it creates cohesion. People start to get to know each other in ways that they hadn't had conversations about before. So I will tell you a little bit about my name, and I will be very open about this. So my name is Kevin Lutz. What's interesting about my name is it's not the name that I was born with. I was actually adopted at a young age, and I had a different name. When I went from hospital to foster family to the family that raised me, I actually was given a new name at some point. And so that was a very interesting thing for me to consider in terms of what my name actually means to me. It always, goes to Shakespeare's "what's in a name" question. But the name that I have now is, I find very interesting, because my first name is an Irish Gaelic word, Kevin, which translates into kind and gentle. Which I quite like, because I like to think of myself as a kind and gentle person, although, some people may disagree on some occasions. But my last name is a Germanic form of Ludwig, which is, it translates essentially into famous warrior. So I have this interesting name that is actually kind and gentle warrior. And so it sort of has always, for me, been an interesting sort of balance of trying to embody both of those aspects of what my name means, to see if I can, because I personally believe that balance is a foundational part of life. So that's what my name means to me. And I think about it in sort of a lot of very personal ways, both in terms of the meaning and how I got it.
And as Kevin said, not to ask others to do what we wouldn't do ourselves. Briefly, my name is David. It means beloved. And like Kevin, I like to think of myself as such, but sometimes I think other people might not see me that way. My father's name was also David, so but he went by Dave. So David is really important to me. It's the differentiating feature in our house between my father and myself. And Kuhl, you might imagine, is a German name, and my mother named each of her children with a middle name that belonged to British royalty because she was really keen on it. So hence Richard is my second name. And the feature of my last name, Kuhl, it actually, in terms of my heritage, it should have been Grunwald, but for reasons around family and adoptions and things, it got changed from Grunwald to Kuhl. So that's the context of our names. So Richelle will do her magic. The questions are: introduce each other by name. How did you get your name and what does it mean? There's 3 of you, and I understand that some of you may be signed up in partnerships and pairs. So there may be some groups that have more than 3 because it's going to be assigned by sign in. So we're gonna give you 10 minutes to do this, and after that we'll likely ask a couple of you to ask what the exercise was like. So Richelle, if you could press the button, go for it.
The conversation is actually exactly what we were kind of hoping for. So I'm going to bring everybody back.
Thanks, Kevin.
And I'm curious, and we don't have time to hear from everybody, unfortunately. So in a group environment, what we would do is we would do this, and we would come back, and everybody would get the opportunity to introduce themselves. David and I are just going to ask a couple of people, just whoever wants to speak up, about what the experience of doing that particular exercise was like. Just briefly.
We've got Joanne's hand up here. I'll
Sure.
unmute yourself.
Perfect. Thank you, Joanne.
Thank you. It was a great way to be actually pretty intimate and very safe. You're talking about yourself, but it's your name. So it was a real quick connection, really quickly. I got to share with 2 Roberts that don't call themselves Roberts, Craig and Mac. And we actually found that we had a lot in common. We had some commonalities that, although I'm on the East Coast and they're on the West Coast, it was a really easy, really fun, and very intimate conversation because it is about ourselves. So wonderful experience. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Boyd and Lori have their hands up.
We do, you do. Yes. I wanted to say thank you guys. That was a great icebreaker. I'm a group nurse, like mental health facilitator. I loved the icebreaker. So it was a great way to get to know people, a great way to feel comfortable with people, kind of let down our hair, literally.
Not too much.
Well, yeah. And well, no. And get to know people and where they're at. And I really liked it.
It was
Thank
great.
you.
It was
Yes,
great.
it was very good.
Thank you. One more.
That's John. Yeah.
Go ahead, John.
Oh,
John Warren.
Just to say, I was just with Kevin Higgins from Cranbrook. So I was at the conference in Westminster in September of 2019. So we were talking, of course, about our names, but it was just nice to make contact with somebody I hadn't seen for a while. I hadn't seen since then. So it was good.
Great. Thank you.
So it sounds like everybody's sort of, most people probably, hopefully, had a good experience with that. And the idea is as was identified, having the opportunity to get to know one another in a fairly safe way, but actually also in a very intimate way. So it's moving from that surface level stuff into getting to know each other in a way that is going to progress into, more personal, more intimate conversations, because we're talking about something that is a very personal and intimate thing. When we begin a group also, we typically identify specific communication skills that we like people to use. We would do this maybe before or after the exercise that we just did. It depends. We wanted to give everybody the opportunity to do this without doing a whole bunch of teaching. Also, we get sick of our own voices, so we wanted some people to have a break from us. But the specific communication skills that we wanted to identify begin with I statements. And this might actually go on to the group norms or the group guidelines model that we talked about earlier. And essentially what that means is using I at the beginning of a sentence. And the reason that we do that is because of an observation that I've had, and David as well has had over many years, that people like to use the second person narrative of, do you know when you are at the thing and you do this thing, and it's never identified as I. And when we use the word you, it actually if I use the word you to describe something that I've experienced, it separates myself from my own experience, which is a good self-protective mechanism in some ways, but also it becomes an avoidance. Somebody refers to it as mumez. Did I get that right? I think so. It's a way that separates me from my own experience. And if I use the word I, it makes it more real when I talk about it. And I've observed many times people are more connected to what they're talking about when they use the word I. So we try as often as we can to move people into using that type of language. It's also important not to be so ham-fisted about it that we wind up, it makes people feel as though they're being singled out. The second thing would be being curious about one another. And so moving into open-ended questions, what was that like for you? Or what was your experience of this? Or what does that mean to you? Things that people can expand on when asking questions and when working with one another. When we're doing something like an exercise like the names one that we just did, being curious about the name. So any questions that can be answered by yes or no are sometimes necessary, but they're often the least effective. So using questions of what and how, not why though. Why it implies occasionally judgment. And then paraphrasing and clarification. And paraphrase and clarification are different than, say, parroting or yes or no questions, because when I paraphrase somebody, what I'm going to do is try and reflect back what I've heard them say, but from using my own words, not using exactly the same words that somebody else has just used, but actually to reflect back what I hear them say from my understanding. So I might be able to take 5 or 6 sentences and shorten it into 1 or 2 that conveys that I have a sense of what that person is actually experiencing. And then, as you've heard earlier today, this notion of empathic responding, which is just very simply trying to understand the experience of the other in what they've said. So is there an emotional component to it? When somebody's saying something, it sounds like that was very exciting for you, or it sounds like that brought a lot of joy into your life. Those use of emotional words can be very connecting, because then I will feel understood if somebody gets a sense of where I'm at. So what might be useful now is to actually identify what we did on the days of the program.
Right, pleased to do it. And just going to give you a brief outline and a bit of an explanation, and then open it to questions and answers, because we really want to provide information that might be relevant to where you are and where your group is right now. So the research we did, it had 3 days, 1 week apart. And the first day was basically asking the question, who are you? And who were you or are you before your disease? And so that whether you are in this meeting as a couple, as a partnership, or as an individual, you were a couple before the disease entered your relationship. You are an individual before the disease enters the relationship. And often the participants would ask us, how is it we didn't even talk about prostate cancer the first day? And we'd say, because you are more than prostate cancer, and we really want you to identify and connect with that person. And the second day then is spent, the whole day is spent focusing on people's participants' experience of cancer. Where are you at? What decisions are you being made? There were always cross sections in the group. It worked out randomly. Some that were in the decision-making process, some that had the illness for 5 to 10 years. So there was a tremendous resource for each other, which is exactly what you're doing in your support groups every time you meet, is that it's that same cross section. So that's the second day would be that, and the third day would be, so what about today, and what about the future, your future, in terms of the sequelae, the consequences of what you've experienced with regard to treatment, with regard to the disease, with regard to waiting, whatever it is, with regard to your relationship. And just very briefly, the results of the study demonstrated that the depression that, and we didn't deal with partners, we only dealt with included men. The evidence is that the depression diminished, the depression they were experiencing when they joined the group diminished over the 3 weeks, and the benefit lasted for a year. We didn't study beyond a year, but the benefit lasted for a year. The benefit of a greater sense of well-being lasted for 3 months. And my take on it is is that we met for the 3 days, and then we met again 3 months later. So that coming back together in itself had a sense of men feeling better about themselves. And then we looked at it again at 6 and 12 months, and that sense of well-being was diminished again. So the whole experience was also great appreciation for speaking about the unspeakable. Often the comment at the end of the first day is, I've just said things to strangers that I've never said out loud to anybody. So that basically is the summary of the day, of the 3 days, is to really invite participants to go on an inner journey. What's the inner landscape of your life like right now? And that was then the value in the decreased measures of depression. Kevin, did you want to add anything before we go to questions?
No, I want to get to the questions. I think just the most important thing being, as the gains change over time, I think it really speaks to the experience of feeling seen, heard, and understood, and the positive impacts that that has. If I'm in an environment where I can actually talk about the things that I'm really experiencing, I feel better. Even if it can't change how I am right now in terms of my prognosis or what's going on for me, I feel better.
Good.
Which might lead into your question, actually.
Right. Thank you. Richelle, could you just repeat the question, please? Oh, Richelle shared this question during the break, but just so that everybody hears it, I'm going to ask her to repeat it.
Yeah, so we received this question in the chat, and sometimes we have new members whose prognosis is really bad. How do you give them hope without lying?
Part of the answer is in the question. And I really applaud the question, and it's a tough one to answer. Without lying is the feature that's really important. Speak the truth, because people will know very quickly if you're not speaking the truth. And I spent 15 years working in end-of-life care in terms of palliative care, and that was a very common question. And people would also ask me, have you ever seen a miracle? I've said, if you're asking me about a miracle with regard to reversing disease process, I haven't seen that. But I have seen a gazillion miracles in terms of what the disease has prompted with regard to people's own journey and with regard to their relationships with the people that they love. So the hope isn't one that, the hope is that you get the appropriate treatment so that your physical suffering is minimized, and that your psychological and spiritual suffering may also be addressed. And that through this, I've had many people say to me, I'm so thankful that I learned about my illness with enough time to finish some unfinished business with regard to my sense of self and my relationship with the people that I love and who love me. Therein lies the hope that this will give you the courage, the incentive, and the motivation to begin to perhaps address hurt, perhaps tell people you love them when you haven't been that articulate. And while this might seem trite, it did in terms of the people, and I did a study asking people what it was like to know they were dying. And these are the things that they said: to speak the truth, to tell people I love them, to make sure that the issues between and amongst us were cleared up before I died, and to put my house in order. So therein lies hope that isn't only in the physical domain, it's in the domain of the relationship with others and in the essence of spirituality. Open to other questions that you might have as well. I think we're probably down to 3 to 5 minutes, but probably have time for 1 or 2 questions.
Hi guys, it's Rob. Am I on?
Yep.
You've got me. Okay, a real quick one. When you're going around the horn, I call it going around the horn at the start of the meeting, checking everybody out. Do you ask the first person, because you know that person will be strong and will give an open and set the bar kind of high and open for everybody else? So pick the right person to go first, and then you may have more openness of everybody who follows. Does that make sense?
Yeah, if it's not a necessary thing, but it's also not a terrible idea. If you know somebody is going to be able to respond in a way that will set the tone for it, it's not a bad idea to do that. One of the things that David and I have done and that I like to do as well is model it personally right off the bat, the same way we did with the name.
Yeah.
So to set the bar that way is another nice way to do it. David, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, it is. There's often anxiety about groups. Some people talk a lot when they're nervous. So role modeling it by what you say is important, and also to possibly, because if there's somebody who's really anxious speaks first, then you've got a lot of anxiety in the group. So that might make it more challenging for the facilitator. So in that sense, I would never ask a new person. I would ask somebody that you've heard answer before, and you get have a confidence that they're confident about the responding to your question. So yes, and it also means the facilitator needs to have an awareness of the group, which is a good thing.
We've got a few more minutes. I'm going to ask, just for everybody, when you're doing an interview with somebody, this is an old journalism trick. There's only one question you need ever, almost. And that question is, tell me about when the barn burned down. Tell me about when you found out you had, it allows the person who's answering the question to go where they want to, where they're most strong, where there's more feeling, where there's more pictures. So tell me about, big, wide open question, then you'll get some good answers.
That's right, a good start. And also then if the answer is very brief, can you tell me a little more to help me understand what that was like for you? So that we're trying also to get people to go into the inner journey. It was going into the inner journey that diminished the depression. And the other thing that also helped was to differentiate between grief and depression, right?
Richelle, you got a question? Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
That's okay. I just wanted to add to that really quickly. With respect to any kind of trauma or stress or medical illness, it's never about the event or the diagnosis or the thing itself. It's about the relationship we have with it. And that's where asking about what is your experience of is extremely helpful. I just wanted to add that on to what David had said. So sorry about that.
Richelle, you going?
yeah, I have one that was sent privately to me. We haven't been meeting with many in the group that do not use Zoom for over a year. From your group experience, from our group experience, their risk for depression seemed to increase. What do you suggest to include them?
So I want to make sure I understand the question. So there's people that are not joining the Zoom and their concern is that they might be getting more depressed. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe
Yes.
In that sense, one of the things I would do is I would connect with them individually. And just have some brief conversations with them. And is it a technical problem? I know that the advantage I have is I've got 2 millennial daughters. So if I'm confused about how to run a Zoom, I can ask them. But I realize how often I'm stuck and I'm not quite sure what to do. So it could be a technical issue of embarrassment or awkwardness. So I'd want to clear that. And then I would also ask them on an individual basis, is there something that we can do to bring you back into the group because you're an important member and we value your presence? It would be another feature that I would look at. Kevin, what would you do?
I would do very much the same thing. I would check in and find out if there's some sort of issue that's actually interfering. And then I would connect with the person and find out, what's going on for them. Is if there's something underlying that is preventing someone from connecting. That's a concern for me. Usually when people disconnect, I start to wonder, is it something about the group? Is it something about the format or the structure of it, or is something else going on for the person? So just finding out what the underlying thing is. And there's not always a thing I can do about it, but I do want to find out and invite them.
And I don't, this is really somber and serious, but I think the work that you're doing with your groups is incredibly important. And the sort of the bottom line is a sense of belonging. And so that once the sense of belonging is interrupted, that also puts people not only at increased risk of more depression and anxiety. It's actually one of the features that may also lead to taking their own lives, because I know from the literature that there's an increased rate of suicide amongst men with prostate cancer. So if people are separating and not joining in as they used to, and I would work hard to see whether there's something that's identifiable to bring them back into that sense of letting them know that they belong in the group and that the group is a place of belonging for them.
There's one question, I think,
Thank you.
from Len Gross.
Thank you very much to Kevin and David. I just wanted to make a comment about affirmation. What I try to do at the end of our presentation, a professional presentation, we try to form a circle. And I found that, as you just mentioned, to ask someone in the circle, I actually, before the meeting, I usually have somebody comes up to me and say, I really have this problem with this, and can you help me with this? And I usually say, well, maybe you could ask that question to the group as we form the circle, and I think you'll get a lot of answers. But I never start the group questions with him. I started with somebody else I already know. I say, well, how are you doing with your incontinence? Or any of those other kind of questions, and gradually get around to the fellow say, I think you had a question you wanted somebody to talk about. And then into the group, and that usually works very well for us. And he feels more comfortable and ease. And there are tons of answers, of course.
Exactly.
And he can take away whatever he feels most comfortable with. I've also had the experience of having someone come into the meeting and say, I'm not going to say a word. And I say, well, that's just fine. You just have to be here and just listen to what the other people have to say. And an hour after, he's chatting about everything.
Yeah, exactly right.
It's just a marvelous feeling to see that transformation in it. And unfortunately, Zoom doesn't allow us to do that. But face-to-face really works really, really nicely.
Great examples. Thank you.
So you can see around the country why those of us on the West Coast are lucky to have the god of support, Len Gross. And
Rob, that's not necessary, Rob. Thank you very much, though.
To David and Kevin, thank you. I think we've wrapped this up. Terrific stuff. I think we called this Speaking the Unspoken. I hope some of the unspoken becomes very well spoken, and with kind of the skills that you guys have talked about. Let's have a rest, and let's keep this rest to 5 minutes. Just if you have to go out and use the loo, in 5 minutes from now, take a look at your watch. 5 minutes after right now, sorry, and we'll be back together for the panel. See you then. Okay, everybody back? All plumbing necessities fixed?
We hope so.
We're now going to go into a panel, and I hope you've read the back.
Oops.
Mic drop. Your mic dropped, Rob. You muted yourself, Rob.
It was my bad. Totally me, Rob. Sorry.
Oh, Richelle muted you, Rob.
I was trying to mute everybody else, and I got you by mistake, Rob.
He's still talking like he's muted. Unmute him, Richelle.
Rob, unmute yourself.
Stop, Rob. Stop.
Rob.
Sorry, guys.
Okay, here we go. Here we go. Am I on now?
Yeah.
Okay. Whew. Okay, we're going to move into a panel, and I hope you've read the 5 people, the background of the 5 people that are going to join us. But of course, we have some dirt on them. Peter Black, Dr. Peter Black. He's an outdoor kind of guy. He's a backcountry skier. But the interesting thing about Peter is he went to Germany on an exchange. He met his exchange partner's sister and decided to marry her. So now Peter Black speaks German at home, and 3 kids speak German. They're raised here. Nice to have you, Peter.
Great to be here. Thanks, Rob.
Michael Cox is I would say an avid cyclist, but if you want to have your stomach turn, ask Michael about the accident. We won't do it here, though. He's a longtime water polo coach. He and his wife Barbara built the largest water polo tourney in the province. He's a jazz freak. He says Charles Mingus is his god. He likes old BMW sports cars, but he's a little jealous at guys who have prettier little sports cars. And he doesn't pay attention to the news. He says he doesn't know what's going on in the world, which I kind of said, how the heck did you get past the last 5 years without watching CNN? But
that's how I made it past the last 5 years.
Dr. Andrea Kokorovic. I hope I sing that right, Andrea. I think you're down in Houston, Texas. COVID has kind of dampened your outside volleyball and spin classes and stuff, but it'll come back. The nice thing is Andrea's from Croatia. We were there a couple of years ago, and it was a great trip, great, beautiful beaches, good food. And Andrea says, honest people. Good. She's from, she did an undergrad in Dalhousie and now in Houston. and I hope she's coming home soon. Dr. Robb Rutledge is in Halifax. He works out every day at Point Pleasant Park. So he's a swimmer like me, and but he did spend 6 months in Vancouver doing some social work stuff, and the most important thing is he's a golfer, a good golfer. Apparently, we're going to have a good game one day. And finally, and this is so cool, here's another golfer I'll have to introduce you to, Robb Rutledge, Gabriela, Ilie. She's a golfer. She's the most interesting thing she says, she's an animal whisperer. She gets whales coming up to her boat and she gets to pat them. She pats belugas and pilot whales and killer whales in Hawaii. She has never mentioned she's seen Flipper, but one day that'll come. She loves to cook, but the key thing is this, she's an animal watcher, an animal whisperer. And she told me, beside patting up, stroking the whales, that she could hold up her finger and there would be a bird land on it. I thought this is just a little bit weird. So we said goodbye. I think I might have muttered crazy bird lady. But then about 3 minutes later, I get an email from Gabriela, and here she is. She did that just after we got off the phone with a big smile on her face. Have to say, that wasn't faked, was it, Gabriela?
No, it wasn't.
No, you did that right then. And
Yeah.
and then he emailed it to me in a minute. Anyways, you folks are on. I got a couple of questions here. I'm going to name a couple to the to you individually, and then we'll open the doors and let's see what happens. Here's something for Dr. Black. Who would be a good candidate as a prostate cancer clinical trial? Does having other underlying health conditions exclude someone from being selected for a clinical trial? Peter?
Yeah, it's a great question. In general, every patient can be good for a clinical trial, and we're always looking at every patient with prostate cancer comes through the door to see if they fit a trial. We of course don't have trials for every patient, but in principle, everyone can be considered. Every trial has its own inclusion and exclusion criteria. So certainly other medical problems could interfere with participation. For example, if a patient had a severe heart illness, for example, that could prevent the patient from taking part in a trial with a new therapy. So we always have to look at that in detail. But I think, those of us doing trials sometimes struggle to get patients to engage in trials because they worry that they're being guinea pigs. But on the other side, it's also important for informed patients to ask their doctors about trials and maybe seek out trials close to home, if not with your own physician.
Good. Dr. Cox, Michael, can prostate cancer ever go into remission after 5 years, say, like other types of cancers? This questioner said, I've had 8 PSA tests, all below 0.008. Can PSMA PET scan determine beyond a reasonable doubt if PC is spreading, even if your PSA tests are like we had here, 0.008? Anxiety is always part of the game. So
anxiety is clearly part of the game. So somebody with a PSA at that level, I'm sure our clinician colleagues will agree, is considered pretty much in remission for prostate cancer. That's a very low PSA level. So below 0.1 is a good number. And we would hope he'd be able to keep that. 5 years is a great number. Today in Canada, we estimate that 95% of guys live at least 10 years. And so a guy at 5 years has a low PSA. He's certainly in good condition to be able to maintain that low PSA for an extended period of time. Is that remission? Well, I guess we'd have to define it as remission. There's a disease that's still probably present somewhere, but it's certainly not doing anything. So that's a remission disease. PSMA PET scanning is certainly one of the hottest topics going in the US and emerging in Canada now. And these are fascinating agents to be able to detect with good deal of specificity prostate cancer as it's metastasized. I don't actually know what the minimum lesion size is, but I do know that the detection is superior to conventional PET with FDG and those sorts of things, and with choline and those sorts of detectors. So that's a great place to start. I think that without a rising PSA and evidence of metastatic disease, it'd be hard to really justify why you would do a full scan like that if you'd already had some sort of other scan. Peter, you might want to chime in on that.
Yeah, I think you wouldn't consider a PSMA PET scan unless the PSA was certainly clearly detectable and higher than that. For example, there's the availability in BC currently is that your PSA has to be greater than 0.4. And even then, there's only a 50% chance of finding something on a PSMA PET scan. So not even a consideration anywhere close to this value.
Right. And I want to caution people that PSMA is a great marker for prostate cancer, just as PSA is a great marker for prostate cancer, but it doesn't mean that it's exclusive to prostate cancer. So PSMA exists on other cells as well. And the other side of the coin is not all prostate cancers make PSMA or make a lot of PSMA. And so it's not a standard bearer. PSMA levels can change quite a bit within a patient, even within a tumor that we look at. So it's a detector, it's good. And it's going to be helpful for guys with advanced disease. But if you're sitting at a really low PSA, then diet and exercise. And as you've been hearing from all of the speakers beforehand, live life, live now, because none of us know what tomorrow brings. So.
Michael, if you had the numbers that this questioner asked about, 0.008 for 5 years, can you say you're cured?
We have too many cases where guys are out 10 and 12 years and PSA starts to rise. And so I think that, we're never really out of the woods. And people like Glenn Gross, since I've known him for the last 20 years, he's always encouraged me to think about patients as patients, and survivors is another word. Cured is a really difficult word. It's hard to define what you can't see.
Okay, let's move on to the bird lady, to Gabriela. Gabriela, do you feel is there one treatment option that offers a better quality of life than the others?
This is such a great question, Rob, because to answer it correctly, we have to be very clear in terms of what do we mean by quality of life. There is no one size fits all, right? It depends on whose perspective and what does it matter to you personally. I think that is why it's so important to have a very good conversation and speak as clearly as you can to your physician. Maybe bring a family member that can help you remember things that were important for you that you forgot to convey. It's so important to be as clear as you possibly can in terms of what matters most for you, because we know from research that all forms of active treatment have some side effects. So it's impossible to just ditch the bullet on all of them. So you will experience something. And from our own research in our own laboratory, I've conducted research in Atlantic Canada and also national research, and we looked at the odds for experiencing clinical depression or clinical anxiety among patients they just got their diagnosis or they're in the midst of treatment, after treatment, survivorship. We went up to 18 years, and it's very clear, the data is very clear. We're dealing with a silent epidemic of loneliness and disconnect. So there is something going on in this population. And when we compare men with a history of prostate cancer diagnosis versus men with any other type of cancer or no cancer whatsoever, the odds are just a little bit over 2 times higher to currently right there when they take the survey, they are clinically depressed or they suffer from anxiety. We even switched around the comparison group, and we compared men with a history of prostate cancer diagnosis versus those that never had a history of any type of cancer, and the odds are similar. So there is an issue there, and yes, that affects you in terms of how you deal with any of those side effects, whether it is urinary incontinence, because you need to we know that mental health affects whether or not you engaging in Kegels has a positive effect or a negative effect. So your state of mind matters, whether you're in a meditative state, whether you are in a state of mind that is calm and peaceful matters, whether or not your Kegels are working. So relaxation matter in terms of how effective your Kegels are, how good are you staying consistent and stable in terms of your exercise routine. We know that exercise matters. We know that prehabilitation matters. We know that minding your mind, pardon the pun, matters. So it is important to I guess, really learn and embrace and genuinely embrace a healthy mental state, a healthy psychological state, and really understand that no matter which avenue you are going to pursue, you're going to have to face some consequences associated with the active forms of treatment. And actually, I should throw in there also, active surveillance, because we know that you don't par much better if you don't have any treatment or you're waiting for the treatment to be applied. And just one more thing about this that I think it's important, because I hear a lot of times when we go and present in prostate cancer, but I know all that, Gabriela. Well, to know and not do is to not yet know.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Speaking of active surveillance, to Dr. Kokorovic, can you comment on the growing sophistication of active surveillance? Is it something of those in support groups should know more about?
Yeah, sure. So active surveillance, as we know, is being utilized more and more for men with low risk disease. And the goal of active surveillance is to provide treatment and not miss an opportunity for missing a bad prostate cancer, while at the same time preserving quality of life, which Gabriela just spoke about, is extremely important. The way I see it for active surveillance, the backbone of active surveillance was and continues to be a digital rectal examination, PSA testing, and now more and more we're starting to utilize other tests, particularly MRIs, in addition to prostate biopsies. And so I think the one thing that has really changed active surveillance has certainly been the use of the MRI. We still don't know exactly how to use it, but I think that most men on active surveillance currently will have an MRI at some point. Other things that you might read about or have heard about are additional tests called genomic testing. Those are also emerging as part of the, I apologize. As part of the paradigm for treating prostate cancer. So things like Decipher for Prolaris, you might read about those. However, it's important to know that these have not yet been studied in active surveillance and have not shown to change outcomes of active surveillance. But I think that we're going to start seeing an emergence of a lot more sophisticated tests over the next several years as we do more studies on active surveillance.
Good, thank you. Robb, Rutledge, well, first of all, I got to ask you, have you ever played golf with that weird bird lady, Gabriela?
Well, she's usually dragging me to the course, so it's good to have someone else with an addiction in the same house. So.
What, are you guys married or something?
Yeah, it's true.
Really? Oh, that's embarrassing,
yes.
Isn't it? Okay.
Yeah.
Brachytherapy, is it the preferred PC treatment minimizing ED side effects? And who may be a candidate for brachy? And are there any prerequisites, I guess?
Yeah, so fantastic question. I'm really glad the surgeons are on the line as well to chirp in as need be. You can't just say brachytherapy is the same thing for every center and every physician. There, I'm going to wave in the background there. So there's Gabriela. So for instance, in British Columbia, they have a very good experience of using seeds, these little radioactive seeds they're putting right inside the prostate gland. They've used that for the earlier diseases where there was a greater likelihood there was cancer within the prostate. And the results from those series within BC is about greater than 90% chance of control of the cancer in the long term, and very, very similar to surgery done at that level. Now, it's not a trial that we can say for certain one is better than the other. And then there's also the high dose rate brachytherapy, where they're actually inserting these little tubes within the prostate gland and then having the seeds kind of come in and come out and so on. And one thing we know for certain about brachytherapy is that it really is dependent on the quality of the procedure, meaning you really want to have a fantastic technical physician actually administer it. So I think the takeaway for each and every one of you is that you should ask your physician, what's the probability of erectile dysfunction after this procedure? In the same way that you would want to ask the surgeon, the urologist, if I have this surgery, whether it's nerve sparing or not, whatever the technique, look, how are your patients doing? What's the chance of erectile dysfunction? And then you have the opinions from two different specialists, and you think about the pros and cons of all of those. And so then you can make a decision about it. But really, each physician has to be able to quote their own numbers. They can't just quote, kind of an average number from the literature. And I'll just answer the rest of the question. Who may not be a candidate for brachytherapy? So there are certain size limitations when the prostate gets too big, and then it gets kind of too dangerous to use radiation, and the tubing is in the middle and so on. So that's one thing. The other thing is that the prostate can be tucked up underneath the bones. And so the brachytherapist can't get either the seeds or the tubing into that area. And lastly, we don't like to use brachytherapy when people are having problems with peeing right from the get-go, right? Because if the tubing is already kind of narrowed and so on, you add radiation and cause more narrowing of the tubing, then the quality of life is quite poor. And we would want to use a different way of curing that person, whether it's surgery or different types of radiotherapy. So ask your physician for the numbers, I guess, is the takeaway from that. Peter and Andrea, did they have a fair rendition on that one?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there are regional differences, and brachytherapy is used a lot in BC, and we generally consider it equivalent to surgery if everything else is suitable. But if I think back, I was where Andrea is a few years ago as a fellow at MD Anderson, and there almost nobody had brachytherapy, and it was poo-pooed. So I think it's a great treatment, and our guys and gals in BC are very good at it.
Richelle, we can. Go ahead.
So I want to give Andrea a chance as well. Go ahead, Andrea.
Oh no, I was just going to say I totally agree with everything that was said.
Is there, first of all, Richelle, are we able to take some questions from the gang out there, the 85 people we've got online?
We've got one in the chat right now. It says, presently in Saskatchewan, we are lobbying the government for improvements to our pathway clinics, inclusion of all men, access to pelvic floor therapy. What suggestion do you have on our approach?
It's an open question.
Yep.
How to do it, I have no idea. That it needs to be done I would definitely support. So we again have a great luxury in BC, and I think we have primarily Larry Goldenberg to thank for this, and others in building up the prostate cancer supportive care program that was initially at the Vancouver Prostate Center and has expanded to other centers, including, for example, Surrey, Victoria, Kelowna. And the idea is that you have really holistic care around the treatment. It has nothing to do with us at the prostate center. Wherever you're treated, you have access to pelvic floor physiotherapy, you have access to sexual health and penile rehabilitation, exercise counseling, diet, any mental health counseling. So the whole thing, I think that is ultimately what we would like to see all patients have exposure or access to.
Are we able to take questions from the 90 people on board, Richelle, if they put their hand up?
Absolutely.
We can do that. So if you've got a question, I think you go down to the bottom of the screen, anyways, on a PC, which I am, and look to reactions, and then raise your hand. And when Richelle finds you and sees you, we can take some questions from the other folks. Dr. Cox, Michael, can you tell us about precision medicine? What's that?
What is precision medicine? Well, Gabriela has just already introduced the concept. Precision medicine, personalized medicine. Actually, Andrea spoke to it as well. It's a whole spectrum of things that are catch terms for how does the clinical community treat a patient more as an individual and less as a representative of a large group of things. So I can remember a time not so long ago when prostate cancer was really considered one disease, a spectrum of one disease. And as time has moved forward and we've developed such great genetic tools, we've been able to start to segregate this disease, much like breast cancer had before us, prostate group, and much like is going on in so many other diseases. And we can break it down into certain subgroups. And right now we're in an era when we're able to pick out very specific mutations that are recurrent in a subset of men with prostate cancer that are then eligible for certain types of therapy. And of course, it has to be taken into into account what the other comorbidities are of that patient. And though they still can be targeted into trials and into therapies that are directed to treat one specific event in that disease, or maybe a cluster of events in that disease that give that individual an advantage over what you would see if you just treated everybody with the same drugs. And so cancer is a genetic disease, and it has a lot of mistakes by the time we see it. And we typically have used chemotherapies and in prostate cancer hormone therapies to try to control the disease on the general population. And then as people fail through those diseases, it becomes more and more important to be able to put them into subgroups that we can treat. We talked about PSMA earlier. There are theragnostic approaches to be able to treat men whose disease seems to be pretty homogeneous for PSMA expression. A lot of that work's been going on here in Australia and in the United States, and it looks really, really well, really, really good for those guys. And I think that that's a great way to go. There are real good treatments for men who have mutations in DNA repair defects that are in common with breast cancer, ovarian cancer, and pancreatic cancer. And guys get a good bit of benefit from some of those therapies, and how and when to initiate those sorts of disease becomes the biggest hurdle. So precision medicine is, simply put, how do we treat that particular patient the best way we can?
Perfect. Okay, let's head out to the unwashed. And who's more unwashed than Kevin Higgins? Kevin, you've got a question?
I've always spoken well of you, Rob. I have a fellow in my group who has experienced movement of seeds from brachytherapy, and I wonder if anybody can talk to this issue. As I understand it, we're talking about a little bit of titanium that has some fancy glowing stuff on the inside, and the glowing stuff does its thing, but then that titanium sits there, and some of these guys live quite a long time following that, and the fella in my group has had 20 years since his brachytherapy and is now experiencing some issues with urination blockage due to seeds coming loose. Is this a frequent thing? Can somebody answer that?
Sure, I'll talk about it. First of all, so when the seeds go in, they have a certain kind of high level of radiotherapy, and then the radiation goes down with time. So, a month later be down to 50%, 2 months later down to a quarter, 3 months later down to an eighth, and so on. So really, it's not the radiation that kind of caused the problem in the long term. In fact, those seeds can even set loose and get into the bloodstream, land in the lung, for instance. But it's such a tiny area where there's radiation that really doesn't cause a problem. And usually they're not radioactive. I suspect what we're describing here is that the radiation has caused a little bit of scarring or fibrosis within that area. The seed itself, I don't think would be causing as much of the obstruction, but it certainly is possible. The seeds do migrate with time, recognizing that they've done their job in the first place. So I'm hoping that's helpful. I think it's more a matter of the scarring that's happened because of the radiation treatment.
And the inflammation that occurs as a consequence of that fibrosis.
Yeah.
What would be the treatment for that kind of a situation?
Well, typically, if somebody's suffering from problems with their urinary, the tubing being too narrow and it's really, really causing a problem, sometimes the surgeons can go in and do a little bit of a stretch or a little bit of a remount to help that situation. But you think about it's a scar, right? So scars usually don't change with time. And so it's typically kind of a more permanent problem. I'd highly recommend the person see the urologist, though. I think that's the bottom line.
Okay, Gavin, can you unmute?
Yes, good afternoon. For the surgeons on the panel, I guess, the repetitive question that we're always asked as leaders is, for the surgeons on the panel, can you have surgery if a brachytherapy treatment or an external beam radiation treatment failed? Are you still eligible to have surgery? I hear that it is possible in some cases. Thank you.
I think the confusion around that question is it depends which surgeon you ask. So typically, I think most urologists would say that a radical prostatectomy after brachytherapy is not something they would want to do. It's not necessarily something I want to do either, but we do it. And certainly after external beam radiation, it's not that much of a challenge. So yes, it's possible after both. It can sometimes, there are various factors that play into it. First of all, the patient chose radiation for a reason in the first place, and they're often not that keen on a secondary surgery, especially because that surgery is going to have more complications than the first surgery would have, especially relating to sexual and bladder function. So there's a very high risk of incontinence and almost certain loss of sexual function when we go back for surgery after prior radiation. So a lot of patients really aren't that keen on it. Yeah, it's particularly hard after brachytherapy for some of the same reasons we were talking about, that there can be a lot of scarring, particularly around the urethra and the part of the prostate away from the bladder. And we have to sew, when we take the prostate out, we have to sew the bladder neck back to the urethra. And if there's a lot of radiation damage, it doesn't heal very well. And it can, first of all, the patient can have incontinence, but second of all, it can also lead to significant scarring, so the patient can't empty the bladder well. And so you can't empty, but you're leaking. It's a difficult situation. We have ways around that, and there are things that we can do, but it is a challenging situation.
Thanks, Peter. Joe and John, I'll be back to you in a second. I just want to ask Dr. Kokorovic, what's the latest information on diet and lifestyle and its effect on the prostate?
Sure, thanks for the question. So a lot of different lifestyle and dietary factors have been looked at in the case of prostate cancer, and most of them have not really been found to have an association. And so when patients ask me, is there anything I could have done or anything I can do? The answer is no. But there's a couple of things that studies have shown might increase risk of having aggressive prostate cancer. And the two most established factors are obesity, so having an elevated BMI, and smoking. And other things have been looked at, some dietary things like red meats and selenium and vitamins and everything, but we don't really know just yet how those affect prostate cancer because the evidence is just not that great. And so for anyone looking for lifestyle and diet advice for prostate cancer, what I would say is do things that are really good for you overall. So exercise is excellent. Maintain a healthy BMI, maintain a healthy body weight, avoid eating too much red meat and stick to fish and all these things, and high vegetable diets, and all the things that are generally good for your overall health might also be good for prostate cancer. And I think it's really important to note that this is especially important in men who are receiving androgen deprivation therapy, because we know that androgen deprivation therapy can really impact your weight. It can cause weight gain. It can cause cognitive effects, and it can change your lipid parameters and have all these effects on metabolic profile. And so in this case, this is where diet and exercise become extremely, extremely important. So that's the advice that I would give to everyone.
Good. Okay, Joe DeHoy, what's up?
Yeah, I want to compliment everybody that's on the panel and who put on this webinar. It's very informative, so very, very good. So my question is, talked to quite a few people who have been diagnosed. They're waiting to make a decision for their primary treatment, and that can take 1, 2, 3 months, sometimes more. And during that wait, the comment invariably from urologists is, don't worry about waiting. Your prostate cancer is progressing slowly, so don't worry about it. But seldom, if ever, they're getting an option of being put on, say, ADT. So then they know for sure, or pretty well for sure, that their prostate cancer would not be progressing. So I get a lot of feeling from them that they're being pushed to make a quicker decision than maybe they would be. And during that 2, 3, 4 months, there's a lot of anxiety. So I'm just wondering why would there not be a protocol in which a patient could say, as well as it's my choice, it's his choice to make a primary treatment choice, as well as he can say, and while I'm waiting, I want to be put on ADT. I think seldom, if ever, he is given that choice.
Who would like to take that one?
I can comment on that. So I think it's an excellent question. The Canadian Urological Oncology Group actually came out with a set of guidelines on how to manage prostate cancer during the COVID-19 pandemic. And we did touch upon the role of ADT in men whose treatment is delayed. And so what we know about ADT before surgery is that it does help with the pathology. So that means that if you receive ADT before surgery and the prostate is removed, it helps with margins and, you know, the cancer once we take it out. But it didn't seem to change the impact on survival in patients. And so right now, the use of ADT before surgery, it's not standard of care, and we're not doing it in everyone. In men who have high risk disease and who can't get access to prostate cancer treatment, there might be a role for using androgen deprivation therapy. And it's something that could be brought up with your surgeon and your urologist to consider. The reason that we don't want to use androgen deprivation therapy in all patients is because it's not just a pill, it's not just an injection. It has a lot of side effects. And those really have to be taken into account before we start these treatments. So just like everything else with prostate cancer and any other treatments, we don't want to cause unnecessary harm. And so I think that's why urologists would be hesitant to start ADT if there's really no indication for it. But in men who are diagnosed with very high risk disease, there might be a role, and it could be something that could be brought up to your urologist to talk about.
So just as a follow-up, so would you say that if a person has a Gleason 8-9 and it's going to be a couple months, that maybe he should be given an option of ADT? The downside of not doing that is he has surgery and then his PSA starts going up, so it's spread. Now, has it spread during that 2, 3, 4 months that he's waiting, and you're worried about side effects of ADT, whereas now for the rest of his life, he has to be on ADT. So you're worried about the 2 or 3 months initially, but for 10, 20 years later, he is on ADT. So what have you saved?
You bring up a really excellent point. I think the important thing to know here is that there are studies out there that have looked at using ADT in men with prostate cancer before surgery, and they have not helped survival. So they have not decreased the risk of progression. They have not decreased the risk of overall survival. And so that's why we're not using it routinely. There are clinical trials right now in a lot of places that are looking at this. Some of them are looking at ADT. Some of them are looking at using these new therapies as well. And so things might change in the future. But for now, outside of the COVID setting, we have enough data and enough studies to tell us that, it might not be useful, and it probably won't help in the long run. So that's why we're not doing it routinely. But I think you bring up really excellent points. I think anxiety is real in being told you have cancer and having to wait for treatment. And so I think my advice would be to talk to your urologist about the role of androgen deprivation therapy in high-risk disease.
Can I just add?
Yep, go ahead, Peter.
I mean, really need to emphasize that the risk of waiting is extremely low, right? So an intermediate risk prostate cancer can wait months without any concern. And of course, if the patient has waited and then has an adverse feature on pathology or has a PSA rise after surgery, they may think it was because of the wait, but it was going to be the same whether they had surgery 2 months, 4 months, 6 months earlier. Prostate cancer is an extraordinarily slow disease. And so the solution to the problem is not androgen deprivation therapy, which can increase your death from, it increases mortality. It's not just dealing with hot flashes. There are real side effects from ADT. So the solution is not ADT. The solution is better education and counseling of the patient so that they understand the relative balance of risk and benefit.
Okay, Joe, going to move along. Ed and John hang tough. I just want to ask Gabriela about Kegel exercises. Have they changed to fit the male anatomy, and what should our support groups know about Kegel?
Unmute yourself, hon.
Thank you. Thank you. Very good question. There is new evidence and a new understanding of continence mechanisms in men, including the complex contribution of multiple layers of striated pelvic floor muscles, and how radical prostatectomy in the process of surgery impacts continence anatomy and physiology. The bottom line is, does male physiology differs than women physiology? Of course it does. And there are different mechanisms, and there's some similarity, there are some differences. I would say, number one, go and talk to a specialist, go and talk to a physiotherapist. We don't have any randomized clinical trials that have looked at the new regimen of Kegels that are being proposed that are more penis oriented rather than anus oriented. But there are some in the process right now. Dr. Hodges, Stadford, Hall, Patricia Newman, Sean Morrison from Australia have a randomized clinical trial in process right now. We also have one here at Dalhousie University, and probably in about a year we'll have the results out. I'd say in the meantime, until we have science to really show categorically that doing a specific type of Kegels that are more, penis front area oriented rather than the back area oriented, I just say talk to a specialist. They're quick flicks, they're long holds, some are sprinter muscles, others are marathon muscles. Both are important. Very important to relax. If you keep a muscle engaged all the time, you get tired and you're exhausted. You don't want to do that. So you need to learn about relaxation. You need to learn about breathing, and very, very important, adherence to exercise in general, strength exercises, aerobic exercises, like Andrea was saying. Make sure you stay fit. Your BMI has to be low. Eat well, and manage your mental health issues. Make sure that you understand your condition, that you speak, learn techniques and practical tools to release your stress and de-stress. What else do I want to say? Also, I don't want to underestimate the importance of frequency and stability. So we know that just engaging in Kegels is not enough. It's important to do them on a daily basis for a certain period of time and for a certain amount of time. And consistency and stability does matter. Also, preoperative Kegels matter more so than postoperative Kegels. And there are, again, a number of randomized clinical trials that are being conducted right now. The jury's still out. We don't know the answer. So what do you do in the meantime? Do the best you can and approach things holistically. Go to a specialist, talk to your physician, use all that wisdom that is already there to help you along the way. I think that's pretty much. Just wanted to give you a very quick example of how important it is to do them on a daily basis and have some consistency and merge them with social support, with mental health support, with exercise in general, good diet, and so on. We had a guy that came in a proof of concept that we did in 2019, and we published the results of that study. He was incontinent for 5 years post-surgery. Was working on a regular basis with a physiotherapist. In fact, he was the man that the physiotherapist would bring to Dalhousie University Medical School as an example when she was using the biofeedback, which reminds me, biofeedback is also important. It's important to have a physical model of which muscles are you engaging when and what happens. It's so important. We have so much science that shows that when you actually know, when you learn any technique to help your body, if you have a physical model of what happens there, at the subatomic or the anatomic level, at the, because the levels of understanding and of truth, it's really much more beneficial. So anyways, we bring this guy in, and we have a proof of concept of the Kegels that we're now testing in the randomized clinical trial. He was incontinent about 60-70%. He was wearing pads. He was unhappy, really unhappy with this. And he goes through a proof of concept with us using this new regimen of Kegels that you're talking about. And we put him through a 28 days program, and he was supposed to do the Kegels every day, 3 times a day. And we had quick flicks, we had long holds, we had anus, front of the pelvis, the whole shamal. So he does them for 28 days, and the man, becomes dry at the end of 28 days. And we have testimonials from him because he was just over the moon. He tried everything, and it didn't work. And yet, bang, all of a sudden he's in a program that is holistic. We dealt with social support and mental health issues and diet and exercise and so on. And, he feels better. So I don't think, again, back to even what Michael was saying, there's no one size fits all. We're all unique. and multidisciplinary wisdom. It's so important in this mixture.
Okay, got about 20 minutes left, and who am I going to? John Warren.
Okay, Rob, I sent in a request earlier, a written request. So I have a friend, maybe you can see it. He's 89.
Yes.
Okay, could you just read that out, and then I'll
Sure.
mute myself. I'll keep myself on, but I'll listen.
I have a friend who was 89. He had prostatectomy in 2003. Recently, his PSA has risen to 18. He was given 4 treatments of radiation using only markings on his hips, not one above the penis. After radiation, the PSA was 6.5. He is going through another PSA this month. Understandably, treatment options are different for someone his age, not knowing all the details, but does this approach make sense?
I was
Rob, your
asking,
mic.
I was asking Rob, I guess, and
Yeah.
Peter, what their reaction would be to that.
Yeah.
I know it's difficult to answer, but
yeah, I mean, I'll make up a story to pretend I understand what's happening here. So he went for cure in 2003 with that PSA rising over time, and there wasn't any type of chance of cure later on. He went on to different types of treatment. One of them obviously was hormone therapy. And then we're doing something new now, which is adding radiation to, it must be maybe, he had a prostatectomy, so it must be like a bone that they treated him. So there's something, this idea of if the cancer's only spread to 1 bone or 2 bones, sometimes we use high dose radiotherapy to kind of kill off the more aggressive cancer cells in that area. And it seems that, a few years later, it improves the chance of survival in the situation. But it's really hard to know what they treated. I suspect it was a bone in that situation, and it's still an incurable situation, but hopefully he'll live for many more years. And we're not, I don't think there's any kind of shortening of options because he's 89 years old. So it's hard to interpret all that, so.
Yeah,
John, you good with that?
I'm monitoring him anyway. And it's funny because I'm thinking he should get a second opinion. And he's embarrassed because his GP, he doesn't want to embarrass, he's likes his GP a lot. So he's embarrassed about asking her for another urologist to go to. So it's a bit touchy, but I'll keep bugging him and monitoring him.
Okay, thanks, John. Ed Long, you're up. Your mic, Ed?
Yep. Yeah. As there's more emphasis on active surveillance, I have wondered, can we incorporate men under active surveillance into our groups? Or are they different enough that we would scare them off or something like that?
Michael?
And if we can incorporate them, what's the best way to do that?
Certainly, men on active surveillance are full of anxiety, and every time I've ever spoken to a support group meeting, there's always been somebody newly diagnosed in that room, and so they haven't been treated yet, and they're anxious, and they don't know what's going to happen, and some of them are being considered for active surveillance, and others being considered for objective therapies, and those men belong there. We talked about it earlier, that men that are coming to support groups face to face face the problem of a relatively small group of men across the entirety of the journey of prostate cancer. And so there aren't a lot of guys around them. And one of the real promises that I see for PCSC and this virtual format is for the ability of men with like conditions from across the country, around the world, to be able to communicate with each other about a specific thing, so that support groups in the virtual space can be an active surveillance support group. And so I certainly have lobbied and will continue to lobby for the development of something like that within the scope of PCSC, where we could have an active surveillance support group and guys with active surveillance issues could talk to each other, where guys that are just had surgery and are dealing with all the issues that you guys are discussing related to continence and sexual health, they can have a group where they just talk to each other. And you just create the ability of guys to talk to each other with the specific events that they have. And that's the silver lining of this whole COVID experience and our rapid rise into the virtual world.
Gabriela, just a quick question for you. Do you have a link for your Kegel exercises that we can somehow get down to the
Thank you,
gang?
Rob. I just answered actually. So we're in the middle of a randomized clinical trial, and in order not to tamper with the reliability and validity of the study, we have to withhold the actual program until the last person in the RCT. So we finished accrual. So it's going to happen sometimes in June, July, enters the last aspect of the RCT. When that happens, we're having plans to roll this program national. It's going to be a free program. Richelle is going to be involved. We're going to make it available for everyone here in Canada, New Zealand, and Australia. We also got funding to do this. We're really excited. But right now, I can't provide you the link.
Okay, we'll wait.
Yeah, thank you.
I've got a question that came in. I'm going to have to read this one. It appears more urologists are suggesting surgery to their patients and omitting referral to an oncologist as for consideration and discussion for the patient to decide on. The support group in discussing with new members seeking information, and this is a regular occurrence. I'm sorry, this is a regular occurrence more than 5 to 10 years ago. So what's the integration of urologist and oncologist expected in BC?
Can I just just a quick one. First of all, the urologists are oncologists. They have like amazing amount of training. They are experts. So like, I just want to make sure that we're clear about the language. I think what they're talking about is, are they going to talk with the urologist and a radiation oncologist? So over to you, Peter.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think in an ideal world, every patient with localized prostate cancer, almost all prostate cancer, would meet with a radiation oncologist and a urologist. The urologists are to some degree the gatekeepers because they make the diagnosis. They see the patient with the elevated PSA and order the biopsy. I would say in BC, the care is not integrated. So we do not have multidisciplinary clinics where we see patients together, but we certainly communicate a lot and share a lot of patients. So the way it is now in BC, it really is up to the urologist to refer or the patient to request referral. And of course, a lot of patients won't know they need to request referral. So it is problematic because I think every patient deserves to hear about surgery from the surgeon and radiation from the radiation oncologist, and in order to try and eliminate bias from the conversation as much as possible. So I think it's an unmet need.
Agreed. And this is the power. Just first of all, hats off to every single man who's out there listening now. Like, this is the information that you guys can share with your support groups, that it is important if the person, I mean, sometimes it's like pretty straightforward. It's a straightforward situation. You're all just able to say, look, this is the best treatment, boom, the decision's over. But if there's questions in the mind, I agree that it's worth having that second opinion to the radiation oncologist. And I tell you, a lot of the time I'm saying to the guys, they come in to see me, review their case, and I say, no, actually surgery I think is a better option for you. So, I mean, it's just reassurance. So hats off to you all guys for learning this, to advocate for yourself, to get that second opinion if that's appropriate.
We have this little thing going around the world, and we're all waiting for a poke in the arm. So I've got a question about prostate cancer and vaccines. Is there anything we need to know about coordinating the timing of COVID vaccine with other vaccines such as Prevnar 13, Pneumovax, Shingrix? Does it depend on the treatment you may be currently receiving, like ADT or other drug? And are you considered immunocompromised if you are taking these types of drugs?
Maybe I'll jump in. You guys can correct me if you're wrong, but I've been on a few COVID panels now, and I just got my COVID shot this morning, the first one. So I guess what they're saying is if you're taking a different vaccine, there should be a space of 2 weeks between the previous vaccine and the COVID vaccine. And secondly, how I see it is ADT is not going to decrease your immune function, because you do want a good immune function at the time of the vaccine so your body has a response to the vaccine, so you become protected to COVID. So I just say big picture is as soon as you're offered the vaccine, take it. I think that's the biggest picture. And your prostate cancer treatment should not at all be interfering with the effectiveness of the vaccine. I mean, heck, your age, kidney disease, COPD, there's lots of other factors that, put you at higher risk of COVID and all the rest of it.
in the larger gang, the 81 of you, don't forget, you can put up your hand and we'll and you can answer your question. But before we do that, Dr. Black, what is stereotactic radiosurgery?
The most important thing about stereotactic radiosurgery is that it's not actually surgery. So
badly named.
It's actually more of a question for Dr. Rutledge, but it's getting a lot of attention, and it is one of these hot topics that actually surgeons really like as well. But the idea is that you're using radiation, using special techniques in radiation to try and ablate tumor tissue, and it started originally decades ago, actually, with brain tumors, where you would align a brain tumor in 3 dimensions and shoot the photons, in urology terms, at the tumor from all sides, so that you can get a very high dose to the tumor that's focused in the middle, with less collateral damage to the tissue around. And so it involves special techniques and special equipment as well. So you have to have the appropriate infrastructure, and it's moved from brain to other body parts. And I think in prostate cancer, where it's really exciting now is the idea of treating individual metastases, whether it's in lymph nodes or bone, with stereotactic radiation. I don't use the surgery in that context. And or there are also methods that maybe Rob can talk about more, of stereotactic radiation to the prostate itself as primary treatment. And there it's really going from the typical, whatever, 35, 40 fractions, where you go in 5 days a week for multiple weeks, and compressing it into a higher dose per fraction, but fewer fractions. Maybe Rob can fill in the blanks.
Yeah, agreed. And I'll try to be like super fast with this as well. So stereotactic radiosurgery just for the prostate itself. So the big concept is, if the cancer is only in the prostate, then a surgery is fantastic. You remove the prostate, you cure the person. What happens in the radiotherapy world is we add a little extra rim of normal tissue that gets the radiation, just because it's possible the cells could penetrate beyond the lining of the capsule. So no matter what radiation technique we're using, we always have to treat this extra rim of tissue. But it also means that the normal tissue beyond that area can get some radiation. And just as Peter's saying, we're getting better and better and better at really, really focusing the radiation right in on the tumor itself. But there's always this little extra rim of tissue, and especially the rectum or the back passage can get irritated from the radiotherapy. And so with this, it seems that the higher dose per treatment, and just like 5 days of treatment, like 1 week of radiation, is promising, because the cancer cells seem to be dying off in the same way that normal cells can die off. And so the high dose per fraction probably will increase the cure rate. And my suspicion is that almost all the new patients, 5 years from now, are going to be in this high dose per fraction using a very specialized technique where we're really sparing the normal tissue, and a high chance of cure, and hopefully fewer side effects with this technology.
Okay, Michael, what's the question I had for you? I had a good one. Oh yeah, do you think Canada will move to using off-label drugs to cure cancer?
You're muted, Mike.
Michael? Your mic is not on.
Yeah, a question best for the medics, and so please chime in. But I think that off-label use is already here. Off-label use is the use of a drug for something that it wasn't necessarily directly approved for. And the best example is treating children, women that are pregnant or nursing. These are groups of people that typically don't end up in a trial, so they don't end up being part of the approval consideration. And so they have all the hallmarks of being responsive to a particular therapy, but weren't necessarily indicated in the trial. So that's an off-label use. And so we have lots of that. And then the other is when we have the ability to use drugs for people who have a disease that we now recognize has the same weaknesses, the same Achilles heels as other diseases. And so that's when that kind of drug can be applied to that other person. In Canada, as I understand it, that still all has to be approved through the health authorities, but it's up to the drug manufacturers to request that sort of off-label use. And if it's approved, then the physicians are allowed to go ahead and use it. Am I right, Peter?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think there are different layers to it. One is the physician is going to want some degree of evidence that the drug's going to work, and you know, off-label will often imply that there is no real evidence. It's like, you know, hydroxychloroquine and COVID-19, as Donald Trump was happy to use, and the medical community is saying, whoa, we don't have evidence. We're not going to do that. Then the other side of it is cost and access to drug. If it's an expensive new drug, it's hard to give it off-label because it won't be paid for. And so then it's up to a patient to self-pay, or if there's some means to get compassionate access, which ultimately doesn't happen very often. So there are different angles on it.
Okay, for anybody, due to a lack of screening during COVID, do you think there will be more cancer cases that have gone undiagnosed? Who wants to take that one?
Peter, what's your impression? Are you seeing guys that are further along, a year out?
Yeah, so I mean, the simple answer is I think yes. I mean, I think there are early numbers coming out that indicate that there's a higher proportion of men being diagnosed with later stage disease, and it's always hard to tell sort of at a population level. My own impression is I'm seeing a lot more new consultations for patients who are admitted to the hospital with widely metastatic and symptomatic disease. And I wonder if, and they're usually elderly men that were probably very hesitant to go and see a physician. Now, the disease didn't necessarily metastasize in, the 12 months that we've had COVID. It's probably been there a lot longer. But I think a lot of those patients would have sought care sooner. But I think bottom line is there's no question that patients have seen their doctors a lot less in the last 12 months. There's been a lot less PSA screening, and we do anticipate uncovering more of that in the years to come.
Okay, here's a question actually from our friends in New Brunswick. At what point in a prostate cancer diagnosis with the PSA elevating does the patient go from active surveillance to deciding on a treatment?
Am I taking that one, Rob?
Andrea can take it, I think.
Or Andrea can take it, yeah.
Sure. So there's no set trigger for intervention. So there are a lot of things that we look at. Number one would be, is there progression on the digital rectal exam? Is there an elevation in your PSA? Is your PSA density or doubling time changing? Is your MRI changing? So there's many, many different things that are variable. So I don't think that based on just a single PSA, we would be able to tell you if you should be looking at escalating into a treatment from active surveillance. It's kind of an art to medicine, the active surveillance protocol, and because there's so many different things involved in it, it would really be up to you and your urologist to decide what the best treatment plan is, and it wouldn't just be based on the PSA necessarily.
I'd like to just interject one comment here. So a few months ago, we had a roundtable a month of September where we had talks each month, and Danny Visperini spoke to us one of those sessions, and he spoke exclusively on active surveillance. And Toronto is the home of active surveillance as far as I consider it. And he has a very nuanced perspective on active surveillance and how it's being used, and when trigger points are met, and what to manage and how to manage them. And I think that that talk is posted on PCSC's connection site that Richelle referred to earlier as a YouTube video. And I recommend anyone who wants to really get a thoughtful insight into that whole world, just go visit that site and watch that video. Danny did a nice job.
Can I just say, since it's a predominantly BC audience, that some people would disagree with Toronto being the home of active surveillance. Larry Goldenberg and colleagues have been doing as long as Laurie Klotz and colleagues in Toronto. Just Laurie has popularized it much more.
Okay.
Michael, you've been slapped.
Yeah.
Just one more question from the audience. With high dose brachytherapy, oh jeepers, hang on a second, it just went away on me. Stop the music. Yeah, with high dose brachytherapy, do all people get a year of hormone therapy and low dose radiation as part of the treatment plan?
No is the answer. The physicians are trying to create a protocol that will maximize the chance of cure and minimize the chance of long-term side effects. And so, for instance, people have very early cancers can be treated, for instance, within BC with the seeds, and there's no hormone therapy involved there. And when they break it into kind of the more middle category, the intermediate risk category, we often feel that radiation alone only is probably the best option for what they call favorable. And then we're adding hormone therapy into unfavorable intermediate risk, and definitely hormone therapy into the high risk side. But the physicians are creating protocols that are maximizing the control of cancer within the prostate gland. And then if there's that risk of having cancer cells beyond that area, then they often add the hormone therapy in addition.
Okay, we've hit 1 o'clock in the Pacific Coast. And I'm wondering, Richelle, are you there? Are we able to do what we wanted to do?
Oh, sure. Just really quickly though, I know that there's one guy who's had a question that's been bugging him.
Sure.
And just he has been getting his PSA test done for a while, and it's always been less than 0.008. Is it 00 or 10?
00, yeah.
008.
Two zeros.
Less than 0.008. And this last time that he got his PSA test done, it was just 0.008. He's wondering if that should be cause for concern, or if it could just be a mix-up by the lab that they missed the lesson.
Yeah.
It won't be a mix-up. I mean, we can put trust in the lab system. There's not a mix-up, but I think the important thing to understand is how extraordinarily sensitive this test is. It's picking up such a low level of PSA. And a lot of men, after being treated for prostate cancer, after surgery for prostate cancer, may have a very low detectable level of PSA. And so the absence of the less than sign means that it has gone from undetectable to now it's actually measurable at 0.008. But maybe it was 0.007 the whole time, and 0.008 is not that much different. So only time will tell if it is going to sort of bounce around at that boundary, and certainly that number by itself is not particularly concerning, but he will require further follow-up PSA just to see if it stays there or if it goes down. Of course, every PSA rise, every PSA recurrence after surgery starts somewhere, so we can't say for sure that it's not going to turn into something, but it's extraordinarily low and really does not mean very much at this point.
Basically the limit of detection of the assay.
Yeah.
I have another PSA reading test at the end of the month, just for comfort. Thank you.
So we're going to wrap it up. It's 1 o'clock on the West Coast. It's been delightful to meet the five of you, to have you come in and share your wisdom with everybody. The one thing I will remember this though is Crazy Bird Lady. You would like to see that happen again? Now she puts her finger in the air and there, little chickadee, and is successful.
And a great scientist too.
The bird
and a great
whisperer.
golfer too.
Oh,
well, we do know she's probably a great magician and had a handful of sunflower seeds while she was doing it.
For Robb and Gabriela, I've got a time tomorrow at 12:14, so be there.
Okay, be there.
Yeah,
on
and
the
bring
flight.
your money. Thank you for
Cheers,
all
thanks
of you.
guys.
Thanks for everybody, and especially to all the 100 or so people from support groups around the country. This is kind of a coming out party for Prostate Cancer Support Canada, and let's hope it will continue, of course, and fill our brains with new knowledge. Thank you to the five of you. Thanks to the 100 of you. You can take the rest of the day off. I'm Rob, and thanks to, of course, to the staff of the Prostate Cancer Foundation for making this happen.